Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 2201, Lorena's Head. After bringing Zelda and Luther to the snake goddess race, Zen had completed his mission. He felt relieved that he was able to get it done without any issues. Whether or not he could leave this world and return to the divine land would be decided after the light of adjudication came. For now, the snake goddess race would be responsible for increasing Luther's cultivation base. Since his work was done, Zen had to return to the Sky Spirit Bone Tower to cultivate in seclusion. He needed to improve on a lot of things and prepare while he had time. He could imagine that it wouldn't be easy for him to leave this world. He had to go through a fierce battle with the Warden race and survive. Moreover, after returning to the divine land, he would be required to face those holy beings too. Therefore, he had to improve his cultivation urgently. Zen took a deep breath as he thought how busy he would be from now on. Since the Nine Li race and the Snake Goddess race had joined hands, the Nine Li race started to have a more active atmosphere. Although the wild gods who were born and raised in this world were not urgent to leave, they were yearning for the further and larger source world. With the help and leadership of the exiles, almost all the members of the Nine Li race sped up their cultivation. The colorful waves in the time sea rolled and foamed, with countless fragments rolling within. White clouds flew above the water, and from a very special angle, the light bounced off the time sea, reflecting colors against these clouds. The waves sparkled a prism of colors as light struck its surface. Deep in the floating island of the Dongfang clan, a towering structure could be noticed. The pale golden palace stood in the middle of the island. By the looks of it, one could tell that the structure had only been recently built. Although it only covered a small area, it appeared particularly exquisite. Seeing its magnificent craftsmanship, any master in weapon refining would probably be amazed. A special kind of gold, usually used to make the top-grade weapons, was used to build this palace. A layer of emerald green rhomboid jades decorated its surface. It was believed that this kind of jade was able to attract the vitality between heaven and earth by nature. For the same reason, some true gods like to make beads with these jades and place them in their houses, hoping they could continuously attract the vitality hundreds of miles around them. Being completely wrapped with such jades, the palace appeared so luxurious. Even the powerful clans on the floating islands would not waste the jades by using them as elaborate decorations for their homes. In the center of the palace was a metal box. A brown liquid boiled on the top of the box, though no heat came from it. As seen from afar, a burly figure appeared at the main entrance of the palace. It was Nicholas. He was known as the ruler of this land, holding the highest post in the eyes of the Dongfang clan and even in front of the holy beings from various powerful clans on the floating islands. The expression in his eyes was enough to cause fear on countless people. Of course, he could also kill countless people with just a glance. But every time he stepped into this palace, darkness took over his handsome face. Slowly walking towards the glazed box, Nicholas reached out to stroke the box gently. The patterns on the surface of the box began to flash with a faint glow under his touch, brown liquid boiling more violently every second. Soon, a mass of silk-like hair came out of the liquid. Having its own consciousness, the hair slowly twisted and wound in all directions. After a short while, a head slowly floated up from the box. It had an unparalleled face. The pretty face had her eyes closed and remained motionless. Seeing this face, the malicious and insidious expression on Nicholas's face disappeared completely. Love filled his eyes as he stared at it. If anyone saw his expression, they would surely sigh in their heart. After all, such a hero had never shown his love in front of others. He was always seen as a tough personality. "Lorena," Nicholas called softly. The head dismissed his call. Her eyes remained closed as if she hadn't heard Nicholas at all. "If you don't like the body I made for you, I will try to find your body back," Nicholas said in a thoughtful tone. During this period, he had tried every means to help Lorena find the perfect body she could use. Being a powerful being, it was easy for him to get all the rare items in the world. So far, someone from the North Sea offered a pure feminine body, and someone from a little-known sky region presented a phoenix's body. Moreover, Nicholas had also gotten a blood condensation puppet. Even if he didn't use them for her body, they could be used to make the clones. But Lorena never looked at them. She wasn't interested in any of the bodies he had found. Nicholas knew that Lorena loathed these bodies. As a matter of fact, he wasn't surprised by her reaction at all. After all, they were from the divine land. How could she possibly take a fancy to these options? All she wanted was only her original body. Upon hearing Nicholas's offer, Lorena finally opened her eyes slowly, a hint of surprise reflecting in her beautiful eyes. My body has been destroyed. How can you possibly recover it? Lorena asked, not wanting to believe him. When Nicholas saw Lorena's expression, a faint smile appeared on his face and his eyes became deep. Your body has been destroyed, but it hasn't been destroyed in the time sea. Are you planning on entering the time sea? Lorena arched her beautiful brows, feeling confused about Nicholas's statement. Nicholas nodded slightly. He was indeed planning to do so. Lorena sneered, there are plenty of time fragments in the time sea, and those fragments are broken spaces. Entering it to find me in the past is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Feeling hopeful, Nicholas answered, if there is no difficulty in my pursuit, I will gain nothing. It was true that locating a specific space and time was much more difficult than looking for a needle in a haystack. Ever since the divine land was built, the time sea had slowly expanded, making it harder to explore. Every period of time in the space would turn into a colorful piece, falling into the time sea. These fragments of time scattered in the water. If Nicholas wanted to find Lorena's body, the only way to do it was to find it in the time sea. He would need to jump into the past and hope he was lucky. Unfortunately, even with his status, it was impossible to clear up the mess of these fragments. Lorena stared at Nicholas. Her expression appeared to be a little complicated. It was common for the young to say such ambitious words. However, hearing it from a person who had lived for countless divine eras as the #1 holy being in the divine land, it sounded really strange. At last, Lorena sneered and closed her eyes. She had not decided yet whether or not she would believe in Nicholas's ability to recover her body. Seeing Lorena's attitude, Nicholas didn't get annoyed at all. He watched as she let her head slowly bury into the brown liquid again. Rumble. Soon, the brown liquid began to boil again, drowning the head back until it was gone. As soon as she disappeared, Nicholas gave a bitter smile and decided to leave the palace. He had been busy recently. Despite his hectic schedule, he wanted to find a perfect body for Lorena, and at the same time to handle all kinds of things as the ruler of this land. Soon after, he reached the Cyan Shadow Hall on the floating island of his clan. As the clan leader, he came to observe the new excellent disciples of his clan. These were the disciples who made names for themselves recently. Some of them were chosen from the Ray Tree, while some were extremely excellent in the arena. Stepping into the Cyan Shadow Hall, his previous helpless and sad expression disappeared quietly, replaced by an aura of arrogance bursting out from his body. Chapter 2202, Hide. In the Cyan Shadow Hall stood over 100 true gods. About half of them were disciples from this floating island, while the other half came from the Dongfang clan who resided at the Ray Tree. Compared with other powerful clans on the floating islands, the Dongfang clan had an especially strong foundation and their recommended disciples couldn't be ignored. In other words, even if the Dongfang clan didn't rely on the floating island, they could still cultivate outstanding young warriors who were comparable to the disciples from the floating island. When Nicholas made his presence, all the disciples of the Dongfang clan had great reverence on their faces. They knew that this burly middle-aged man was the leader of the Dongfang clan and the most powerful holy being in the divine land. But perhaps the title of the most powerful holy being wasn't completely right. After all, the holy beings wouldn't fight with each other easily. Some holy beings would hold back their strength and they might even be more powerful than Nicholas. But on the surface, most of the true gods thought that Nicholas was the strongest. Greetings, Holy Nicholas. The young warriors in the hall all bowed. That our Dongfang clan can stand on the top of the floating islands is not because of me alone, but all the elites present here. You are the future of our Dongfang clan. Nicholas looked down at the crowd and nodded. According to the rules of our clan, we will reward the best disciples every once in a while. This time, I will personally reward the best disciples. All the young warriors' eyes lit up in great interest. Everyone present recently had the best performance. They either had abundant harvest in the forbidden areas, or made a great contribution to their clan, or showed astonishing abilities and strong potential in the arena of legends. The reward would be presented by the master of the clan this time, so they were all especially excited. On the side of the hall, a demi-holy being from the Dongfang clan quietly walked to Nicholas's side and whispered something in his ears. Just as Nicholas was listening, his eyes fell to a corner of the hall. Others also noticed Nicholas's gaze and they secretly followed his eyes. There at the corner stood a young man in white. Eventually, Nicholas spoke with a smile, "The Ray Tree is a place with many talents. It's a great honor for our Dongfang clan to have such a young outer elite. Your name's Lowell, right?" Murmurs broke out when everyone in the hall heard Nicholas's words. "Lowell, he's Lowell. I didn't expect Lowell to be a disciple of our Dongfang clan on the floating island, and he's an outer disciple. I was wondering which clan he came from." They didn't think that someone who had firmly taken the first place among the top-ranked true gods in the arena of legends would be at the corner. It was even said that he was going to challenge consummate true gods who were on a higher level than him. But no one knew which clan this guy belonged to. Some people who didn't even know the truth managed to guess that Lowell was the anonymous man. Now that he suddenly appeared on the Dongfang clan's floating island and joined them in the hall, it startled all the disciples. Admiration, envy, and even hatred. The disciples looked at Lowell with varying emotions. After all, in order to climb to the top, Lowell defeated some of the present disciples from the Dongfang clan. Lowell cupped his hands toward Nicholas. "Yes, good," Nicholas said approvingly. "You have been able to win all the way without a single defeat so far. Through the divine eras, you are one of the best." As he spoke, an imperceptible trace of gloom appeared in Nicholas's eyes. No holy being in the past had ever reached Lowell's record of 29 consecutive wins. But when it came to record of consecutive wins, it was inevitable for Nicholas to think of the anonymous man, Zen. Last time in the underground world, Lorena sent Zen away with some theurgy. It upset Nicholas that he didn't find Zen anywhere in the divine land because he was a man who would never give up easily. He had deep hatred towards Zen and he wanted to eliminate him. His intense hatred came from the mere fact that Zen was the son of Mike and Lorena, and this was what depressed him most. How could he tolerate his existence? As a man, no matter how generous he was doomed to be narrow-minded in this situation. "I hope you can put forth more effort and set a record of the most consecutive wins." With that, Nicholas reached out and clenched his hand. Two rays of light, one cyan and the other yellow, slowly spiraled up from his hand and turned into two swords. The disciples who saw the two swords began to whisper to each other. "They're the cyan-yellow double swords. The cyan sword represents the 5 spirits and the yellow sword represents the half-moon. How could the master give those to an outsider like him? This isn't right. Lowell doesn't even use double swords. Why would the master give him such a reward?" The cyan-yellow double sword slowly floated in the hands of Nicholas. His eyes fell on the woman next to Lowell. Even when just standing in her 3-colored dress, she looked like a pure beauty filled with vigor and vitality. "Iris Dongfang, you're Winthrop's daughter, right? Send my regards to your father. Your branch trained such an excellent female warrior. Very good. This pair of cyan-yellow double swords are rewarded to you too." Nicholas smiled faintly. Iris was the girl Lowell had saved before. She followed him ever since. But she became too reliant on him and couldn't live without him even when she had the chance to return to the Dongfang clan. In Iris' eyes, Lowell was always so mysterious. It was because of that mystery that she was attracted enough to ignore everything. Up till now, she still couldn't see through him. Although there were dangers in introducing a mysterious stranger into the Dongfang clan, Lowell must have his reasons to suddenly require to join the Dongfang clan. Nevertheless, she still willingly helped Lowell hide everything, such as the fact that he could appallingly eat the slate. For others, it looked like Lowell was able to enter the floating island by playing up to Iris, and if they got married, he would be a member of the Dongfang clan. But Iris knew that it was the other way around. In fact, she was subservient to him. "Kids, take the swords and show your gratitude to the master," the demi-holy being urged. A gentle smile was on Lowell's lips as he cupped his hands and Iris followed his action. "Thanks, Holy Nicholas. Thanks, Holy Nicholas." Nicholas flicked his finger and the pair of cyan-yellow double swords shot towards them. Chapter 2203, The Guidance of the Broken Sword. To be honest, Nicholas really treasured Lowell's extraordinary talent. So when he had heard that Lowell joined the Dongfang clan for Iris, he rewarded them the cyan-yellow double swords, with the obvious intention of drawing Lowell over to his side. After he had rewarded them the 2 swords, he also continued to reward other outstanding disciples. Meanwhile, Rocher tucked the sword into his space ring and stood quietly in a corner. Then, his eyes scanned Nicholas. This was Rocher's first time to see his target. If he were to be asked about first impressions, then he honestly found it hard to dislike this middle-aged man with a fair-skinned face. Yet, he was fated to be this man's enemy. It could never be changed no matter what happened. It was because of that very reason Mike had created him. And so, his first step in going undercover in the Dongfang clan was to take advantage of Iris. In any case, he could gather more resources in this place, and more importantly, he could gain the trust of the Dongfang clan, or even Nicholas. Once Nicholas had given the rewards, he left with the demi-holy being. Chatter between the young talents quickly filled the Cyan Shadow Hall after the elders left. These young true gods usually fought in the arena of legends, went into closed-door cultivation, or traveled through the forbidden lands all day long. They rarely had the chance to get together. It was true that they were all outstanding, but they were also very arrogant. They all tended to compare with each other when they were together. Currently, all of them cast hostile looks on Roche and Iris. After all, they were in the Dongfang clan. How could they possibly allow an outsider to get the best reward? At that moment, something clicked in Roche's mind. "Let's go," he said to Iris with a smile. Iris simply nodded and got ready to leave with him. It was also her first time to enter the floating island of the Dongfang clan. Truth be told, she felt out of place. If it wasn't for Lowell, then she might have never gone to the place in her whole life, even if she was eligible to enter the floating island. Just then, they heard a highly sarcastic voice that said, "I didn't expect that a sub-branch of our clan could decline to this extent." They failed to find any young talents among themselves, so they had to sell a woman to befriend an outsider. It's so humiliating for our Dongfang clan. Such a shame. A frown tugged Iris' lips down. It was known that the Dongfang clan had many branches, and the competition among them was quite tough. Although Iris's branch was just a sub-branch, they still had a demi-holy being who guarded them. They did not fail, as that person said. That person was clearly trying to offend them on purpose. She also knew that the person's words weren't for her, but for Lowell. However, she didn't want him to get involved in a fight just for her sake. "Let's go," she said and took Roche's hand. She intended for them to leave, when suddenly, Roche stood still and refused to go. Instead, he turned around and said in a loud voice, "If you want to trouble me, you can just come straight to me. Why did you have to mock a member of your own clan? You are being ridiculous by playing this kind of trick." When he was done speaking, his words were followed by a series of claps. A man slowly walked out of the crowd. He wore a golden crown and a jade pendant, which made him look distinguished. All the other people who saw that man quickly began to wait for a good show. That man was born and raised in the floating island, and his father was a holy being of the Dongfang clan. Although he had very outstanding talent, his name had never appeared on the Jade Wall of Legends. It was said that it was because his father didn't allow him to enter the Arena of Legends. "I heard that you have performed outstandingly in the Arena of Legends. Now, you seem to at least have the guts to challenge me, so let's go straight to the point. I'll be very glad to spar with you," the man said as a tinge of arrogance flashed across his eyes. The corners of Roche's lips curled up. He was always down to accept such a challenge. Simply put, he wouldn't miss any chance to train and improve himself. The scene in the Heavenly Dragon region of the Divine Land looked like it came out of a wild fantasy. A huge mountain called the Thunderstorm Mountain stood out against a backdrop of a balmy sky. Bolts of golden lightning had constantly flashed at the top of the mountain range for countless years. It was so dangerous that even a true god had to be very careful while walking in the Thunderstorm Mountain. It was certainly not fun to get struck by the golden lightning in the sky, and possibly die in misery. Generally speaking, a top-rank true god with powerful strength was able to walk in the mountain alone. On the other hand, the mid-rank and low-rank true gods would have to form a team and employ all kinds of ways to protect themselves from the powerful lightning. This day, however, a low-rank true god traveled alone in the Thunderstorm Mountain. He didn't have company, nor any protective gear other than a broken sword. Crack, 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 with a flash of golden light, the thunder rumbled with a deafening sound. The true god raised his head. A sliver of fear was evident in his eyes. "Are you sure that I have to go into the mountain alone? I think it's better for me to wait and form a team with other true gods." "What do you think?" he muttered helplessly. "Team up with others? Ha ha, your cultivation base is too low, and everyone will just look down upon you. Who would want you to join them? Moreover, we are going to find the secret treasure in the mountain. Do you plan to share it with others? You are the weakest among all the godly geniuses, the least talented and the most cowardly one. If you don't cultivate harder, you won't even be qualified to watch from the sidelines in the future." His sword mocked. This low-rank true god was Lone, the otherworldly swordsman. He had sneaked into the divine land not long ago after he became a true god. The first thing he did after he entered the divine land was take the secret treasure in the Thunderstorm Mountain, which was a treasure the former owner of the broken sword had left behind. Although what the broken sword said was true, Lone still felt somewhat indignant. Anyway, he can't deny the fact that he had only stood out among the geniuses in the evolutionary universe with the help of the broken sword. Even after he had entered the divine land, he had to rely on this sword to guide him. It was safe to say that the broken sword had given him everything he had. "I'm not a coward," he retorted. He boosted his speed, turned into a beam of light, and flew down the undulating mountain road. Crack, crack. Once he had set foot on the Thunderstorm Mountain, the golden lightning in the sky kept striking at him as if it had finally found a target. Luckily, he cleverly used his special bodily movement skill which enabled him to move quickly like a loach in the water and avoid all the thunder strikes. Some true gods in the Thunderstorm Mountain noticed Lone, and they all looked at him curiously. Look, a low-rank true god came on his own. He really wants death. This boy is quite flexible. He has barely avoided the thunder at the outer area of the mountain, but if he enters the inner area, he would die thousands of times. Chapter 2204, The Traveler. Luckily, the broken sword that Lone possessed was already familiar with the Thunderstorm Mountain. He had managed to resist all of the attacks at the periphery of the mountain range using his own strength. After he had successfully entered the inner circle of the Thunderstorm Mountain, the golden thunder had become stronger and faster. Lone's current strength level was not enough to let him cross this place. However, the broken sword was well prepared for this journey. The Thunderstorm Mountain had an ancient history. It used to be the ancestral property of a large clan in the Divine Land. This clan also had holy beings, and they had been above the time sea dozens of divine eras ago. They had become a powerful clan above the time sea, and were famed across the Divine Land at that time. Unfortunately, their honor and fame did not last too long. This clan was sidelined by the alliance of the powerful clans on the floating islands. As its foundation was not solid, the alliance of the powerful clans managed to quickly drown its floating island in the time sea. Naturally, the ancestral land was also affected and the members of this clan were exterminated. Now Lone's sword was to guide him to obtain all the inheritances of this clan. The broken sword carried this hatred within it. But it was just a sword, and there was no way for it to take revenge. Years later, when Mike obtained this broken sword, he allowed it to choose a swordsman in the evolutionary universe for itself. In the end, the sword pinned its hopes on Lone. Lone was just a godly genius, so it was impossible for him to help the sword take revenge. However, the sword's goal was consistent with Mike's, so the only reason it assisted Lone was to help itself. Lone entered the inner circle and a strange blue rune flashed on the blade of the sword. When the rune flew into Lone's mind, a blue path appeared in his eyes. The blue path winding through the mountain extended a long distance. When Lone followed this path, he discovered that all the golden thunderbolts seemed to be paying special attention to him, and each and every one carefully avoided him. No matter how intense the thunderbolts on both sides of the path were, not one of them hit him. It was as if he had an invisible halo of protection around him. He entered the inner circle of the Thunderstorm Mountain with ease and reached the end of the path, where there was an unremarkable cliff. Many true gods had passed by this cliff, but they didn't notice anything unusual about it. The history of the Thunderstorm Mountain was spread far and wide in the Divine Land. Many true gods hoped to dig out some relics, gain benefits from the ancestral land of the noble clan, and perhaps even chance upon some forgotten valuable inheritance. But they had found nothing over the years. That was because they didn't have the extraordinary broken sword. When Lone casually brandished the broken sword, he opened the door to the great clan's ancestral land. Soon his figure disappeared from the cliff. Many shocking things had happened in the Divine Land during these years. On the face of it, the entire Divine Land looked calm and peaceful, but in fact, there were many crises going on in it. During this period of unrest, the ruling slate shook constantly, and the 833rd rule recorded on the ruling slate had been triggered several times. In the past, the Zhang clan would have reacted strongly to this kind of thing. After all, it was the Zhang clan that was responsible for guiding warriors to the Divine Land and managing the entrance between each universe and the Divine Land. But after Harold issued the warning, this clan became silent, turning a deaf ear to complaints in such matters. They knew clearly that the evolutionary universe was the root cause of such things, but in such a delicate situation, the Zhang clan chose to be silent. 3 holy beings from the alliance of the powerful clans on the floating islands had died, and the universe built by the holy being of the Lu clan had collapsed completely. They were in a state of crisis. However, 2 of the 3 holy beings who had died could be resurrected, while the holy being of the Lu clan could not be brought back from the dead because of the collapse of his universe. So the legend that the holy beings were immortal was proved wrong again. And this time, the effect was far more shocking. The only way to kill a holy being was to destroy their universe. However, someone had succeeded in severing the connection between the holy being and his universe, thereby easily killing the holy being. This method had never been used or even heard of before. Soon the news spread among the great clans on the floating islands. It was said that Nicholas had found a woman in the ancestral land of the Han clan, and that this woman caused the lethal fire magma to erupt from the ground and take the lives of 3 holy beings. It was this woman who had the theurgy that caused one of the holy beings to die, and, at the same time, cut the connection between the holy being and the universe, which caused the collapse of the universe. It was on this day that the ruling slate trembled again. In the Cyan Demon region, far away from the Time Sea, a woman in a light blue cotton dress fell out of the transmission channel and landed with a heavy thud on the grass. Ouch! She felt a sharp pain upon impact with the ground. Standing up, she looked around the desolate place sadly. Where am I? She tried scanning her new environment, confusion replacing the sorrow on her face. Before she successfully stole into this place, Win had informed her that it would be easy for her to find the fairy palace. Zen might be waiting for her in the fairy palace and she was looking forward to seeing him. But there was no fairy palace in sight. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. While she was trying to get her bearings, a ray of light appeared in the distance. 8 burly men rushed over to her. Most of the men were proving godly warriors. One of the 2 men in the lead was a low-rank true god, and the other was a mid-rank true god. It was indeed very rare to see a mid-rank true god in such a remote place. What is a woman doing here? Ha ha, this must be arranged by the fate for our master. Let's take her back and hand her over to our master. The men got very excited when they saw the woman. They surrounded her immediately. Amazingly, the woman was not frightened at all. Instead, she just stared at the men blankly and asked, "What place is this?" "This is the Cyan Demon region," answered the mid-rank true god who was leading the team. The Cyan Demon region, the woman repeated and appeared more confused than before. She vaguely recalled that the fairy palace was located in the Swirl Forest. After she entered the Divine Land, she had to go into the Swirl Forest before she could find the fairy palace. Where is the Swirl Forest? The woman asked the hulks around her. Swirl Forest? Ha ha, it's not far from here, but it's not a place you can enter, the mid-rank true god laughed wickedly as his gaze wantonly swept over her. The Swirl Forest kept expanding much like other forbidden lands. Now, almost 3/4 of the Cyan Demon region had been swallowed up by the forest. All clans, large and small, which once lived in the Cyan Demon region, had already moved away, and the ones gathered in the Cyan Demon region were all notorious gangsters of the Divine Land. Why can't I enter it? The woman asked curiously. Seeing the woman's puzzled expression, the mid-rank true god laughed in a sinister way. If you want to know the reason, just follow us. If it was another woman in this situation, she would definitely be very vigilant. No woman would go away with strangers in an unknown land. However, this woman was different. After she thought for a moment, she blinked her pure and elegant eyes, nodded without hesitation and said, "Okay, let's go." Chapter 2205, Looking for her husband. Upon hearing the woman's response, those strong men burst into fits of uncontrollable laughter. It didn't take them much effort to deceive this woman into coming with them. They thought she was a weirdo who wasn't cautious at all. "Come with me then," the mid-rank true god said, leading the way. The other proving godly warriors and the low-rank true god followed suit. The woman walked forward, surrounded by all those warriors. It seemed as if she was being held hostage, but the woman didn't see anything wrong with what was going on. The Cyan Demon region territory was sparsely populated. After the city was abandoned, its ruins became a home for extremely tall and huge plants from the Swirl Forest. Normally, weeds could only grow up to the knee, but over there, they towered the entire place and almost reached the skies and the sun. On several occasions, they would hear strange bestial noises from the depths of the forest, which scared them. Finally, the woman came to her senses. She murmured, "Where are you taking me?" "To meet our leader," the mid-rank true god answered with a mocking laugh. His words made her rather unhappy. "I'm not here to meet your leader. I'm going to the Swirl Forest." "I know. Our leader knows where you can find it," the mid-rank true god explained. As much as possible, the mid-rank true god didn't want any trouble. He tried his best not to get himself into conflict with that woman. The less trouble, the better. If she just followed him, then it would be much easier for all of them. If she did something stupid, then he would be forced to take action. Okay, the woman responded. However, she had this look on her face. Something's not right, she thought. Unfortunately, she was a little naive. Back when she was still in the universe, she had a master who protected her even if she could crush countless warriors in the illusion battlefield using her own strength. However, in the divine land, she didn't have as much control as before. Even before she managed to sneak into the divine land, her master and fellow disciples had already given her tons of suggestions and words of advice. Those obviously didn't help because she was still confused and clueless. Not long after, a broken wall with a height of over 1,000 feet appeared before them. It was a large city before, and now it had become a nest of this group of people. As the woman continued to follow them across the city wall, the mid-rank true god shouted, "Leader, I've found you a beautiful woman. Would you believe me if I told you that she's a low-rank true god? I don't even know where she's from." Then he laughed as if he just said the funniest thing. As he kept on laughing, a few people began to appear from behind the broken bricks. All of them were men. Most of them were proving godly warriors, while a few others were low-rank true gods. A woman in the Cyan Demon region. Unbelievable. Her origin is unknown. I haven't seen a woman for hundreds of years. Dang it. All of them gave her lustful stares. Despite so, they all knew that she belonged to their leader. They could only look at her. The woman winced when she realized what was actually going on. She was tricked by a bunch of bad guys. As the woman grew frightened, the godly tile in her inner world began to flash intensely. She was naive, but that didn't mean she was a fool. If she was, there was no way she could prove the godly way in such a short time like she had done. Swish! The purple light that emerged from her body immediately turned into 4 purple swords that circled in front of her. The 4 swords rolled around, and within a radius of about 1,000 feet, sand and stones flew in all directions. The proving godly warriors who had been standing behind her saw the situation go wrong, and they all scrambled to keep a certain distance from her. The god's killing sword array formed by those 4 purple swords released a dangerous aura that alerted everyone. The proving godly warriors couldn't help but panic. Even the mid-rank true god had a hint of fear in his eyes. He didn't expect such a foolish woman to possess that kind of strength. It wasn't her strength that scared him. No matter how strapping she was not a match for their leader. It was impossible for any ordinary clan to train such a powerful low-rank true god. He was starting to think that she had some strong background. The people in that place wouldn't survive anywhere else. If they offended any great force, it wouldn't take much time for their entire population to be wiped out. Boom! From a distance, a large and heavy stone board that was once on the ground instantly sprung up. Then, it flew through the air and smashed against the woman's head. The woman nibbled lightly at her crimson-colored lips. The sword before her vibrated. The crowd didn't know how she did it. The enormous stone board smashed into pieces right in front of her. Behind the pile of rubble appeared a short top-rank true god. The man looked rather unpleasant. His eyes were shaped like bells, and his eyebrows resembled worms. He had what looked like sausages for his lips. He was very funny looking. Well done. This woman is good. I wonder how she tastes like. The top-rank true god laughed pretty hard. The woman was in no mood to laugh at the funny-looking guy. With just her strength, how could she put up a fight against a top-rank true god? But she had no choice. After all, there was no one she could rely on. With a face painted with desperation, she formed a profound sword tactic using her fingers. All of a sudden, the 4 purple swords charged towards the top-rank true god. The fatal move of the god's killing sword array sure was something else. Even some mid-rank true gods in the divine land would find it difficult to withstand the power of the woman's 4 swords. To her surprise, the top-rank true god opened his mouth, which was filled with long white teeth. In the blink of an eye, he swallowed all of the swords. He used the heaven-devouring technique. By practicing such skill, he could swallow almost anything he wanted to. The top-rank true god rubbed his belly and laughed mockingly. The internal momentum coming from the purple or a godly way is delicious. Chick, why did you come to the Cyan Demon region? The woman immediately sank into despair. She couldn't help but resent herself for being too weak. She only went there to see her husband in the swirl forest. She thought the people who resided closest to the forest could help her, but she was wrong. She never thought it to be such a weird place. If she didn't leave soon, she could die. There was bitterness written all over her face. With a hint of sadness in her voice, she said, "I intend to enter the swirl forest to find my husband." The swirl forest was a forbidden area of the divine land. Only members of the powerful clans on the floating islands were qualified to explore it. That woman just said that her husband was inside the swirl forest. The rest burst into laughter. All of them laughed except the top-ranked true god. He opened his mouth and asked, "Your husband? Which part of the swirl forest is he staying at?" Chapter 2206, Agree to Help. The top-ranked true god was none other than Wayne, the big mouth whom Zen had released from the dungeon of the fairy palace. He and Master Evil were known for their very bad reputation in the Divine Land. After Master Evil was released, he had been anxious to call back his original followers and relive his past glory. Thus, he naturally hurried back to the vast sky region. On the other hand, Wayne had stayed in the Cyan Demon region and gathered a group of outlaws in the region to form his own force. The Cyan Demon region was barren, but he was very happy these days. Therefore, it wasn't a coincidence for him to meet the woman there. He had been imprisoned in the fairy palace for so long, and he knew that the only habitable place in the swirl forest was the fairy palace. So when he heard the woman in front of him say so, his heart skipped a beat. "I don't know. I only know there is a fairy palace in the swirl forest," the woman replied, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Is there a fairy palace in the forbidden area? The swirl forest is full of fierce beasts. Who could possibly build a fairy palace there?" Ha ha ha. Once again, the malicious men around them burst into laughter. Although those men knew that the woman belonged to their leader, it was okay for them to mock her before their leader had his way with her. When Wayne heard those words, he was sure that she was Zen's woman. Before Zen had released them from the dungeon, both Wayne and Master Evil had taken an oath by their inner demons that they would be loyal to Zen forever. Of course, it did not mean that Wayne couldn't eat this woman. After all, his oath was that he must be loyal to Zen, not the people around him. Yet, he didn't dare to do so. He knew very well how truly powerful Zen was. Zen was the son of Holy Mike and the disciple of Holy Bromley. If Wayne really ate this woman and Zen found out, he would surely end up in misery. Besides, he was highly ferocious, but not ungrateful. It was because of Zen that he had gotten to leave that dungeon which had imprisoned him for several divine eras. If he could send the woman to the fairy palace and return her to Zen, then Zen would be grateful to him. Perhaps, Zen would even thank him by saying that the oath was no longer valid. With that thought in mind, he grinned and asked, "Is the man in the fairy palace you mentioned called Zen Luo?" The woman, who had been very desperate, suddenly looked stunned and nodded. Her watery eyes stared at his ugly face in a daze. "Leader, is there really such a person?" asked the mid-rank true god. Wayne nodded and said, "That man helped me before." "Really?" The woman, who had looked like she was going to end, was now filled with excitement. She had never thought that things would turn around this time. "I can take you to the swirl forest, but this forest is a forbidden area of the Divine Land. I can't guarantee if I can enter there. I can only take you to try our luck," said Wayne. What he said was true. There had been weird changes in the swirl forest recently, while an abnormal phenomenon had transpired in the entire Cyan Demon region for several days. The swirl forest was a forbidden area and one could exit it from any area, but they could only enter from the entrance. Once the entrance was sealed, they could only enter it through the floating islands. So he was unable to bring this woman inside. Then again, given that Holy Bromley was so powerful and the fairy palace was in the forest, they could always take a chance. The woman was overjoyed to hear his words. Meanwhile, Wayne's followers were utterly speechless. They had never thought that the woman who appeared out of nowhere had something to do with their leader. Deep in the swirl forest was a beautiful emerald green lake. It was like a gem that was embedded in the center of the forest. In the middle of the gem-like lake floated a golden bobber, which exuded a strong, medicinal scent that attracted many fierce beasts. There was something in the lake that played with the bobber and caused it to rise and fall constantly. In addition, there was a transparent fish line connected to the bobber. The fish line extended all the way to the bank of the lake, to the jungle, and extended over 10,000 miles all the way to the fairy palace. Today, Letitia and the others all stayed in the training tower and couldn't leave it. The entire fairy palace was filled with intense blood, and its strong and tangy odor permeated everywhere. The square in front of the fairy palace was littered with broken wings, birds' bones, apes' broken arms which were several thousand feet long, broken skulls, and even crushed brains that were scattered all over the place. Anyone with a weak mind would vomit at the disgusting scene. In the center of the square was Harold, who had taken off his shirt. He was handsome and had a well-defined body, but now all his muscles were swollen. The blood that flowed in his blood vessels was of various colors. An extremely powerful and tyrannical force circulated in his body like mad and emitted an incomparably strong aura. "I've got rid of this batch of beasts," he said in a voice that reached the fairy palace, as he clenched his fists. At the pavilion in the fairy palace was Hallett, who held a fish rod in his hand. He quietly gazed into the distance, but he couldn't hide his nervousness. "We can't disturb the thing in the lake, and don't disturb Augustus. Not even a single move. Master Joy, keep on sending those beasts to the fairy palace," he commanded. The last time they tried to gain control of the swirl forest had failed. After Harold took Yan to the fairy palace, Hallett changed the plan, in which Harold played an extremely important role. A woman who was over 10,000 miles away from the fairy palace stood on her tiptoes on the top of a tree. She was none other than Joy. From her point of view, she could see tens of thousands of beasts that all rushed towards the lake from all directions. Those fierce creatures were the most powerful creatures in the swirl forest. There were blood and even golden apes, and a flock of swirl birds thousands of feet long that flew in the sky, which the consummate true gods found difficult to deal with. Of course, she had arranged everything beforehand. She had created the purple skyland, which had completely isolated the entire lake from the outside. The exit of the purple skyland was connected to the fairy palace. "All right," Joy answered and nodded. At that point, waves of purple light spread out everywhere. The light waves immediately enveloped numerous vicious creatures in the purple skyland. A few seconds later, an overwhelming amount of beasts were moved to the huge square of the fairy palace in an instant. All the beasts that charged towards the lake were now taken into the fairy palace for Harold to kill. Harold would also rely on the fairy palace's own array. After all, he was the one who had been the most pressured. Moreover, he had already killed countless vicious beasts in the past few days. Swoosh, swoosh. The power in his body suddenly erupted, and he killed all those beasts in the blink of an eye. It was as easy as crushing dry weeds. Chapter 2207, The Soul of the Forest. Pop, pop, pop. The vicious beasts couldn't resist Harold's fist at all. They had encountered such an attack after passing through the purple skyland. Without any time to even react, they had all turned into a pool of blood mist. Weaker fierce beasts had been torn apart only by Harold's air waves. But even consummate true gods found it difficult to deal with such beasts. In the octagonal pavilion, the scene took Hallett's breath away. This guy, what a strong freak. Back then, Harold was indeed also very powerful, but the gap between him and Hallett wasn't all that wide. If Hallett encountered Harold in the arena of legends, there would have been a 40% chance of Hallett's victory. But now, the strength that Harold displayed had put a great distance between him and Hallett. There was no doubt that it was all because of the Everest Spirit Mountain. After Harold took control of the mountain, his strength has improved remarkably. I wonder about Gus's future progress. While Hallett was lost in thought, he felt a sudden tremble from the fishing rod in his hand. His round eyes flashed as his expression changed. "Gus, the fishing rod is shaking. Attention." The rod was over 10,000 miles long, but Hallett could still feel its subtle vibration. In the lake over 10,000 miles away, the bobber swayed intensely. Augustus held his breath in the void above it. It had been several days and nights since he settled there. The creature they intended to capture was highly alert, sensitive to every little sound and movement around it. Once it sensed any such movement, it would curl up deep within the lake. But now, it finally swallowed the bait. Augustus was still rather nervous. If it ran away again, they'd probably lose any chance of finding it again. Plop, plop, plop. The undulation in the water grew more and more violent, indicating the restlessness of the creature there. In the fairy palace, Hallett suddenly stood up and raised his arm like a lotus root, tugging hard on the fishing rod. Simultaneously, he said to Augustus through his life vitality, "It is time." Swish. As he pulled the rod, his strength was transmitted over 10,000 miles away into the lake. Swoosh. The bobber floated up the lake's surface and was pulled out of the water along with a little yellow creature. It was only about the size of a single palm and as round as a calabash. Two little dots lay in the center of the calabash, like the eyes of a human, with small limbs around the body. It looked like a small, underdeveloped person. The creature was the soul of the swirl forest, the key to controlling the forest. In the innermost part of the swirl forest, the lake and the lairs of several fierce animals lay there. Once anyone got close to the lake, the nearby creatures would be alerted. Dealing with these beasts was no easy thing. Once any movement was detected, the soul of the forest would hide deep within the lake, making it impossible to even see, let alone catch. Attempts to obtain this creature usually ended in failure. But this time, Joy alone had managed to stop all the fierce creatures from entering the woods. No matter how loud the sounds around the lake were, they were completely blocked out by the purple skyland. It's time. At this moment, Augustus turned deadly serious. Hallett had poured great effort into getting this one opportunity. If he messed it up, it would have all been in vain. The moment Augustus left the void, his hands intertwined as they reached for the soul of the forest. Whoosh! He moved extremely fast. When the soul of the forest noticed his presence, it had already been gripped tightly in his hands. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The little creature cried out in panic as it struggled to squirm out of Augustus' grasp. A layer of pale yellow membrane seeped out its surface, making it so slippery that it slid right out of Augustus' hands. You're still trying to escape. Augustus' face darkened as he squeezed into the void, making a circular space crack appear. By then, he had already completely closed the space around the soul of the forest. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The soul of the forest began screaming wildly in its struggle. Then, the entire swirl forest came to life. The trees that towered tens of thousands of feet tall swayed wildly and the eyes of every ferocious beast and bug turned red as blood. They rushed to the lake in a frenzy to save the soul of the forest. But because of the purple sky land, all the beasts were sent to the fairy palace for Harold to deal with. He was under greater pressure now. Even the water in the lake seemed to have its own consciousness. It turned into a pile of sharp water swords and rushed toward Augustus. Humph! Augustus grunted, allowing the swords to stab him as he once again reached out to hold the soul of the forest tighter in his hands. Meanwhile, he instantly shot dozens of complex fingerprints from his hands. A special pattern was formed in the void after each fingerprint was made. The more fingerprints there were, the stronger the impact was on the creature. When Augustus finished shooting the fingerprints, the soul of the forest finally gave up its struggle. A smile then replaced Augustus' grave expression. He sat in the air, crossing one leg over the other, and placed the soul of the forest in front of his elixir field. Buzz! A soft light shot into the sky from the lake's center. After a while, the entire swirl forest fell into silence once again. The originally aggressive beasts calmed down as well and turned around to leave the scene. Atop the tree, Joy sighed in relief. It was indeed no easy thing to control a forbidden land. Standing in a pool of blood in the fairy palace, Harold gasped for breath. The huge square was filled with the acrid smell of blood. The liquid had reached up to his knees. One could only imagine how many beasts he had killed there. It's over. Saul, let Jan, Jeffrey, and the others come out. Hallett sighed heavily in relief. At long last, they had fulfilled the heavy task their master had charged them with. After being locked up for so long, Jeffrey, Letitia, Jan, Lavender, and the others finally left the training tower. But the moment they stepped out, the bloody scene before them frightened them. So many beasts were killed. Jeffrey exclaimed, wide-eyed in surprise. Lavender inhaled the air. She had missed the taste of blood after killing. Did you succeed? Hallett nodded once and pointed to the air. A faint halo of light appeared in the void. Within it was Augustus, body resting quietly. After being integrated with the soul of the forest, his temperament had undergone a great change. His long black eyebrows were also stained and now a light golden color. But Augustus was wearing a strange expression as he said to Hallett, I saw the big mouth we met in the dungeon. Didn't Zen release him? Why did he come to the swirl forest? It looks like he's with a woman. After controlling the swirl forest, Augustus could feel every single thing in the forest. He had found Wayne and Margaret at the edge of the forest. Chapter 2208, Missing. In fact, Margaret and Letitia had both met Augustus before. At that time, Zen had battled against the incarnation of Augustus while passing the true path. However, Augustus' attentions had then been focused on Zen, so he hadn't even given Margaret a thought. Augustus knew without a doubt that there were several important people locked up in the dungeon of the fairy palace, especially Wayne, who had left a deep impression on Augustus before. Therefore, Augustus was able to instantly recognize him. They finally arrived at the land transitioning into the swirl forest, and a flash of pale golden light effused the big trees inside the swirl forest. It was this living, writhing golden light that repulsed all others from taking a step forward. Even though Wayne was a top-ranked true god, he was also unable to enter into the forest. What transpired just now? Just before Augustus began to merge with the forest soul, the entire swirl forest emanated waves of anger. Wayne had never witnessed such a scene. He was stunned, and his big mouth gaped wide open. Margaret couldn't comprehend what was happening. She was a bit familiar with the lore of the swirl forest. However, she still questioned, is there really no way to enter? No way. All of the forbidden areas have only one way in. Now, this entrance is shut to us, and it is impossible even for a consummate true god to enter it by force. Wayne said firmly, unless you have the means to enter the floating island of a powerful clan and use the transmission array on the floating island. The floating island of a powerful clan? What's that? Can I join this powerful clan on the floating island? Margaret wondered aloud, blinking her eyes. Wayne became somewhat impatient upon hearing Margaret's musings. This woman seemed to be ignorant about everything. Given the complexity of this situation, it might take him forever to explain this to her. It didn't even matter whether she was qualified to join a powerful clan or not. If she really wanted to do it, taking her out of the Cyan Demon region and getting her to the Time Sea would be a great challenge to Wayne. He felt a sense of regret then. He hadn't expected his men to bring Zen's woman back and give her to him. Already this had caused him a lot of grief. As Wayne became somewhat morose, there was a sudden change in the swirl forest. An invisible force ebbed out of the fairy palace inside the swirl forest. Crash, crash, crash. Instantly, the trees groaned and tumbled over to either side with a suddenly spray of leaves. A path had appeared through the undergrowth. The path extended tens of thousands of miles from the fairy palace to the very edge of the swirl forest. And a kind of tunnel had suddenly appeared within the layer of golden light that enveloped the edge of the swirl forest. Margaret looked at the gap with a puzzled expression and then doubted, "Are you sure we can't enter the swirl forest?" Wayne was also staring in dumbfounded silence at this bizarre scene. As a top-rank true god, he was destined to run a third-tier clan. Therefore, he knew the laws governing the forbidden areas well. This scene was completely beyond his knowledge. He looked at the scene with eyes wide as saucers. After a long while, he said, "It seems that someone wants us to enter. Is it my husband, Zen, who has invited us in?" Margaret's eyes narrowed, and a challenging smirk had appeared on her face. "I wonder why he hasn't come to pick me up himself." Wayne rolled his eyes and sneered, "Your husband is not capable of that." Wayne had just succeeded in leaving the confines of the fairy palace. He believed that no matter how talented Zen was, he lacked the might to progress to such a level of achievement. "Without any doubt, it is my husband." Margaret wasn't at all perturbed by Wayne's words. She shrugged and advanced into the new pathway without any hesitation. Wayne reluctantly followed her as he worried about Margaret's safety. The beasts in the swirl forest were extraordinarily ferocious, and there were some extremely powerful monsters that dwelt in the forest and that even he couldn't oppose. As the two of them trudged along the path, they didn't meet any ferocious beasts at all along the way. However, the tunnel stretching from here to the fairy palace was thousands of miles in length. Considering Margaret's slow pace, it would probably take a few months to reach their destination. After walking slowly along with Margaret for 1 hour, Wayne finally grew impatient, and grabbing Margaret, he flew along the path. Not long after, Margaret's eyes suddenly lit up as she happily chirped, "Look, the fairy palace is here." Of course, Wayne knew this instantly. He had been a prisoner within this fairy palace for so many divine eras. So even if the fairy palace should turn into ash, he could recognize it still. But why was there suddenly such abundant vitality in the fairy palace? Wayne could smell a strong metallic tang of spilled blood before he had even drawn close to the fairy palace. When they entered the fairy palace, they were all shocked by many wild beast corpses piled up on the ground. However, Saul had already begun clearing them up. Harold, having recovered his original manifestation, was waiting in the fairy palace along with Yan and the others. Once Lavender saw Margaret, she folded her arms over her chest with a smile, saying, "It's indeed her." However, when Margaret saw these familiar faces, she did not show any surprise at all. Although there were other strangers also standing in the fairy palace, she did not even notice their cultivation bases. She expressed her only concern, "Where is my husband? Why don't I see him here?" Hearing this question, Harold suddenly flashed a look tinged with bitterness in his eyes. He replied in a low voice, "Let Yan answer that." Hearing that, everyone grew pensive and could not help but feel upset in their hearts. In Harold's and Hallett's eyes, Zen was preeminent and irreplaceable. If others died, it would be a small matter. However, if Zen died, they would face immense problems and have many things that could not be achieved in the future. That would really throw a spanner in the works. In the past, after sending Zen into the depths of the ground, Harold had left. As he had sensed that the array flag arranged on the Tai clan's territory had been destroyed, he immediately feared that something terrible had happened. The array flag was a precious treasure of the Luo clan. Even a consummate true god could not obliterate it so easily. In other words, since Harold's departure, a holy being had dived to the ground. It was then that Harold began to have misgivings. Later, he had heard chatter among the powerful clans on the floating islands. 3 holy beings had died, and 1 universe had collapsed. It was said that Nicholas had captured someone underground. As for Zen, there was no sign of him anywhere. This was an unacceptable result to Harold and those others in the fairy palace. While they were still in the dark about what happened, they could only bear the news of this shocking result. All that they could do was to work harder and harder according to their original plan. There was no time to mourn or lament as they shouldered the heavy burden. Therefore, everyone was in a bad mood recently. Margaret's unwitting question had stirred up everyone's regrets, and they felt the loss again as their hearts sank. "My brother is missing," Yan whispered sadly to Margaret, who she had never met. Margaret's eyebrows immediately furrowed in fear as her face became a pale lavender. "Missing? What do you mean?" Lavender noticed Margaret's expression and sadly shook her head. Letitia blinked her eyes, fighting the tears that threatened there, and her long eyelashes fluttered. They knew Margaret all too well, and she might not restrain her emotions. Only Joy, who stood to the side, was watching Margaret with great interest. She had detected an astonishing quality in Margaret. This woman had successfully cultivated the purple or a godly way, and her purple power body was most unique. Naturally, Joy was intrigued. Harold had revealed some of Mike's plan to Joy, including some insight about the godly geniuses who had great talents. Margaret must be one of the so-called godly geniuses, but what Joy hadn't expected was that Margaret was also Zen's wife. Chapter 2209, Teaching. The leader of the fairy palace right now wasn't Hallett, nor was it Augustus. It was, instead, the charismatic Harold. After Mike died and Bromley left the Divine Land, it was he who planned and put everything into place. He was calm in the face of Margaret's relentless questioning. "Zen is indeed missing, but we are currently working hard in tracing him." "Why is he missing? What did you do to him? How did you treat him?" Margaret might look obedient, but she quickly grew hysterical if she got angry. She wouldn't be able to distinguish between friend and foe once she got into one of her moods. Her temper also made her blind to whether or not the person in front of her was weaker or much stronger than her. Joy, however, was quite intrigued by Margaret's temper. She slowly walked up to the young woman and talked to her in a soft, calming tone. "The fate will bless Zen. He'll be fine." "How would you know?" Margaret shot back with a gloomy face. Augustus couldn't help but roll his eyes. He wasn't as well-mannered as Hallett and Harold, so he wasn't averse to arguing with a hysterical woman. "You know what? Nobody knows if he's fine because nobody knows where he is." Margaret got even angrier when she heard this. Her eyes were suddenly filled with killing intent and a purple mist started to swirl around her body. In the blink of an eye, 4 long swords appeared beside her and were directly aimed towards Augustus. "Hey, how dare you!" Augustus yelled with an exaggerated expression on his face. Given Margaret's cultivation base, she was only showing off her incompetence in front of an expert. Augustus intended to severely make fun of her. However, Joy stood in front of Margaret and gently hooked her fingers. The 4 swords that were on their way to Augustus lost direction and circled around Joy instead. This sudden change in trajectory and movement filled Margaret with shock upon realizing that she had lost control over the purple mist. What was more interesting was how the 4 swords quickly dispersed around Joy into purple mist and began transforming into different shapes like dragons, strange birds, and exotic beasts. Joy was now fully in control and could do whatever she wanted. Margaret's eyes couldn't help but widen in amazement as she stared at this scene. In the evolutionary universe, she had been considered as the authority on the purple or a godly way. Not even her master had the same level of awareness she did. Margaret never truly cared about how powerful she was, but she had always been aware of the difficulty others had when it came to surpassing her in the purple or a godly way. Thus, she never expected that this woman in front of her could take control of her swords and even manipulate the purple mist to such an extent. "Why can you use the purple or a godly way?" "No, how can you control it to such an extent?" Margaret asked. She knew how powerful she was and also just how difficult it must have been for Joy to have seized the control of the purple mist from her. Joy simply smiled. "Would you like to learn it?" Any ordinary person would have recognized this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and naturally would have agreed. However, Margaret wasn't like any ordinary person. She quickly shook her head. "No." Lavender, Letitia, and the others expected this answer and could only shake their heads in regret. Unlike them, however, Joy was a bit shocked at Margaret's rejection. "Why? You may not care about Zen's well-being, but he is my husband. I care very much whether he's dead or alive. I must find him." With these words, Margaret quickly turned to Wayne. "Let's go." Her orders startled Wayne. He hadn't stopped trembling ever since he returned to the fairy palace and firmly hid himself behind Margaret. Who were these people? There were 3 consummate true gods and a demi-holy being in front of him. Wayne knew that any one of them could easily kill him if they wanted to. He had a faint memory of Augustus tricking him in prison before. Wayne was very careful lest he annoyed them and got sentenced to the dungeon all over again. The Divine Land is so large. Even if we leave the Swirl Forest, we still won't be able to find Zen. He reasoned bitterly. Even if we can't find him, we still need to try. Margaret declared determinedly. The young woman's expression was resolute, but Joy couldn't help but shake her head. Don't put him on the spot. It's impossible for you to find Zen right now. If you stay here, you have a chance of reuniting with him, but if you leave, you might never get to see him ever again. She said this not just as an empty threat to Margaret. The young woman was already extremely lucky to have found the fairy palace. Given her personality, she would most certainly just die without a trace if she traveled the Divine Land. You mean Zen will come back? She asked. Joy nodded. I think so, as long as you are patient. Joy once dreamed of more warriors learning the purple or a godly way. Unfortunately, nobody in the Han clan was able to develop it. In the end, her Purple Soul Hall was dismissed. Margaret was most probably arranged by Mike to be her disciple. She wouldn't miss the opportunity to impart her wisdom to this young lady. With her temper quenched, Margaret finally agreed to stay in the fairy palace. As for Wayne, he quickly said his farewells in fear of the two men from the GU clan taking him back to the dungeon. The Divine Land was now in a temporarily stable state. Nicholas, who originally planned to conquer the Abyss Demon region, gave up on this idea for the meantime. Rocher, who had successfully snuck inside the Dongfang clan's floating island, chose not to enter the forbidden areas to fight. He would leave the Time Sea once in a while. Divine cities would collapse every now and then, and the stone tablets they housed would mysteriously disappear. Lone had opened that door and set his foot down upon a new path of fate. In the evolutionary universe, Wynn helped the godly geniuses steal out one after another and also activated the 833rd rule continuously. Given the extraordinary talents of these godly geniuses, they too forged their own paths upon entering the Divine Land. Some of their paths were clear and straight, while others deviated slightly. This deviation brought unexpected adventure but also great danger. Some advanced sharply but others ended up getting killed. 800,000 wild bones. Over 100 wild gods helped Zen extract the wild god power and inject it into the cave of wildness. Nash. Under the immense pressure of his bones tangled together, Zen's bone membrane continuously made this nasty, rasping sound. The pain intensified even more. It was even more difficult for Zen now as he tried to become a top-rank wild god. Once one reached this peak, it was said that there would be no more bottlenecks. A warrior's body had the potential to grow infinitely as long as they devoured enough wild bones. This was the reason why Adele and several others managed to reach astonishing heights of 3 to 4 million feet. However, none of them were able to break through to the other shore realm. This was a dilemma they had to face since the rules that matched the wild gods in the whole chaos were no more. Chapter 2210, Enter Zen's Body. While Zen was trying to break through to become a top-rank wild god, number 9527 was still up in the bone tower, carefully observing Zen. It had found himself conflicted, wondering about how to best approach Zen. Number 9527 didn't have much authority. From the very beginning, the task the Brain Masters had given to it was merely to keep an eye on Zen and ensure that he remained alive. And it had performed its duty well so far. But now, the task had changed. The Brain Masters had ordered the brain units to pay close attention to this world's movements. The Brain Masters also knew perfectly well what had happened a few days ago. They were aware that the prisoners had dared to plan an escape from this world. They were incensed to hear such divergent ideas, and had since been on high alert. The Brain Masters, however, were not interested in the idea of leaving this place. After all, their top master was still sleeping. If they left, it would immediately wake him up. He would, however, never allow this world to become a prison to him. The problem was that Zen's departure would cause trouble. After having waited for so many years, they were finally lucky enough to find a suitable guy. If they let him go, the sleeping master would wake up and find out, and all the Brain Masters would be doomed. Thus, those fat Brain Masters were extremely worried about Zen and his intentions. Frustratingly, they couldn't interfere with Zen or do anything to control him. They had considered imprisoning Zen in this world, but after careful consideration, this turned out to be an unrealistic strategy. If what was said was true and he really had the ability to leave, their plan would be thwarted. It was too risky when the stakes were so high. The Brain Masters had been discussing this for a few days in the spiritual world. Usually, the brain masters could always make their judgments in an instant, as it was so effortless for them to communicate with each other. It was testament to how complicated this issue was that it took the brain masters a good few days to discuss it, in spite of the high speed at which they were able to communicate. Finally, they had come to an agreement. They would allow number 9527 to approach Zen. When it received this command, number 9527 felt both great honor and great sadness. It was a great honor, because it had been entrusted with such an important task, which meant it would be granted higher authority since it was sort of the top master's substitute now. Evidently, its status and importance surpassed that of those brain masters it resented so much. At the same time, it was also a poignant moment for it. Despite feeling incredibly humbled by the trust of the master, it was sad to leave the spiritual world. It was its homeland, the only place where it had relatives and friends. At the moment, however, it had more pressing concerns on its mind. It was overcome with the kind of nervousness one felt before a first date. When we meet for the first time, how should I greet him? Would he be scared, or maybe he wouldn't care, it thought, pacing around. While number 9527 was planning its approach, Zen's bones started to break apart again. He had begun his quest to become a top-rank wild god. It is now. With no time to hesitate, number 9527 flew over the top of the cave at lightning speed. It could move freely and quickly in the bone tower. Whoosh! It did not take it long to enter the cave of wildness through the caves inside the bone tower. Landing on the ground, it rushed towards the sclerite shining in Zen's chest. When undergoing the body tribulations, Zen focused all his senses on his own body. He felt the sclerite on his chest shift, but he didn't notice that a wisp of soul had got in. This time around, the body tribulations were much easier than the first time he had endured them. After all, Zen already had some experience in dealing with them. Soon, the power of millions of wild bones, including 50 shares of blood wild bones, had been completely absorbed by Zen. Zen, once again, lay paralyzed in the cave of wildness. Even after the body tribulations were over, Zen couldn't move for some time. He could only wait in silence for his physical body to slowly recover enough to be able to move. As he lay, the silence was suddenly broken by a voice from within Zen's own head. Hello, the sound had come so suddenly, out of the heavy silence, that it startled Zen. He first thought that this was a voice message sent through the life vitality, but soon he realized that it was not. It was coming from the consciousness. Who was that? Zen's soul replied in his mind, his breath quickening from anxiety. After all, no one wanted to become possessed. Even though many things had entered his body over the years, it was not something he desired or welcomed, especially not when it was of an unknown nature. Zen didn't expect that the situation would become too complicated this time. My name is No. 9527, number 9527 answered Zen. Who are you? By now, Zen had deduced that the sound was coming from the sclerite in his chest. Zen had always been very curious and confused about the origins of this sclerite. However, he had more important things to worry about than the provenance of a bone fragment. He would never have guessed, however, that it would be able to speak. I just told you, didn't I? I'm No. 9527. It replied, its voice puzzled. Zen had asked it the same question twice. Although it had observed the behavior of groups of wild gods countless times, it still couldn't fully understand them. After all, it had been born in the spiritual world. Although it had its own consciousness, it didn't have much experience in dealing with people. It was not a human soul. Zen made a decision quickly. As Zen had already had some experience with these uninvited guests that entered his body, he knew what to ask. Where did you come from? He continued. The spiritual world the master has built. The world is buried deep underground, number 9527 tried to explain clumsily. Who is the master? Zen asked patiently. Master. Number 9527 thought for a while and finally gave the answer that Zen was looking for. The master is the Chaos Ancient God you always refer to. The Chaos Ancient God. Zen was shocked. The Chaos Ancient God you mentioned is this bone tower? He asked hurriedly. Yes, number 9527 answered. Zen was silent for a while. He had never expected that this sclerite would have a connection with the Chaos Ancient God. There were so many wild gods and exiles in this world. Why would the Chaos Ancient God choose him? After thinking for a while, Zen asked again, then why did you enter my body? What is this sclerite? Because the brain masters ordered me to do so, answered number 9527 simply. This answer confused Zen. He wasn't completely sure he had grasped what the brain masters were. Only after a long and tedious conversation had Zen gradually understood what was going on. The first time he underwent the tribulations, he had actually been infused with the bloodline of the Chaos Ancient God. Timotheus had known about this, even though he didn't tell Zen. For some reason he didn't yet know, the brain masters that number 9527 mentioned chose him and ordered number 9527 to enter his body. It had explained that its goal was to help Zen reach the other shore realm with the cultivation method of the Chaos Ancient God. The old man, Adele's father, had also mentioned this matter before, and this had put a glimmer of hope in Zen's heart. Perhaps, if he took advantage of this shortcut, Zen could reach the other shore realm with his physical body. Now, this so-called number 9527, who was a strand of Chaos Ancient God's soul, was repeating its own thoughts back at him. Zen couldn't help but feel puzzled. But I could reach the other shore by crossing the Sea of Truth using the Grand World Cultivation method. What difference does it make if I use my physical body to reach the other shore? It makes all the difference, number 9527 replied. Using the Grand World Cultivation method to reach the other shore, you can't take anything with you. But if you use your physical body to reach the other shore realm, you can take back some important things of value from the other shore. There is a great difference between these two methods. This explanation stunned Zen. In Zen's mind, the other shore was a realm. Like the Sea of Truth, it should be a concept that people could only think vaguely about. It only existed in creatures' imagination, and thus was not real. But according to this guy's explanation, this did not seem to be the case. The truth was very different from what Zen had anticipated. Chapter 2211, The Truth Theurgy. Then, what do you want me to bring back from the other shore? Zen continued to ask. We can't tell you, number 9527 answered stiffly. This guy is so stubborn even though it is asking for help. Zen curled his lips. If you don't answer me, I'll drive you out. You're not strong enough, number 9527 responded. Although your soul power far surpasses that of others at the same level, it's far from enough to expel me. Its answer was straightforward enough, which made Zen lose his interest in trying to get an answer. He really didn't have any good way to deal with it, since the opponent was after all a strand of the soul of the Chaos Ancient God. The wound on his body caused by the body tribulations was in no time healed quickly. After making sure that his condition was back to normal, he stretched his limbs for a while. Afterwards, he immediately left the Cave of Wildness. Have you succeeded this time? Baldwin asked as soon as he spotted Zen. He was standing above the Cave of Wildness. He was greeted by a nod and saw a smile on Zen's face. He knew that Zen had been successful. He had sent over 100 people in order to help him undergo a breakthrough and become the top-rank wild god. He was well aware and certain about Zen's ability and sufficiency in absorbing the wild god power. It could be said that Zen's body was like a black hole, easily absorbing almost all the wild god power without missing a single drop. The wild god power that he obtained was far beyond that of the ordinary wild god. Zen was truly qualified to have succeeded on just the first time, but Baldwin could not help but sigh. He was held responsible and in charge of maintaining the Cave of Wildness, distributing the wild bones to his race members. He had met and had various encounters with many talents in his race. But it was the first time for him to meet a guy like Zen. He knew that this might be their last encounter. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Zen lightly stood on his tiptoe and flew away. Grow, Zen spoke in order. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A powerful aura was suddenly emitted from Zen's body, and his body began to swell in the blink of an eye. 1,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet. If someone's body could reach a height of 8,000 to 10,000 feet, they could be considered the mid-rank wild god. Before, Zen had been able to make his body reach the height of 10,000 feet. Go on. Zen felt that the wild god power in his body was still very powerful. Exerting his full strength, his body followed the order as it continued to grow and swell. 15,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 30,000 feet, his body continued to grow until his head almost reached the top of the cave. At the same time, the wild god power in his body was almost exhausted, reaching its limit. It reaches the limit, Zen said calmly. The result was what he had expected. At the same time, a thought flashed on his mind and 3 heads and 6 arms appeared on his physical body. He wanted to test if he would activate the bloodline Theurgy after becoming the top-rank wild god. Exploring it for a while, He did not feel anything unusual. It seems like it's not easy to activate the bloodline Thurgi in the wild god power, Zen thought to himself. Just as he was immersed on this thought, No 9527's consciousness once again sprung out to his mind. The bloodline Thurgi, you already have a one, don't you? You are peeping into my soul. Zen was a little annoyed. Isn't that normal? Noticing Zen's anger, number 9527 felt a bit surprised. In the spiritual world of the Chaos Ancient God, the minds of all the brain units were exposed to each other. In other words, everyone was clear about everyone's thought. There was no need to hide something since they were accustomed to this. Nonsense, Zen couldn't help but retort. After a pause, he came to a realization and asked, what did you say just now? Bloodline Thurgi. You just blamed me for peeping at your soul. Number 9527 had no idea why Zen's thought had changed so quickly. What we are talking about now is the bloodline Thurgi. Zen fiercely corrected it. Okay, number 9527 responded. When you first experienced the body tribulations, you obtained the inheritance of the Chaos Ancient God's blood, so you have already obtained the bloodline Thurgi. The inheritance of the Chaos Ancient God's blood. The information certainly shocked him. The oldest man had known about it, but he didn't tell Zen or spread to the public. Zen was after all the grandson of the Grand Chieftain, and the wild gods had deeply valued the purity of their blood. As you said, it is the blood transplant. The sclerite in your chest you just mentioned is formed because of the blood, number 9527 added. The blood of the Chaos Ancient God has been planted in my body. Zen never expected this. He thought for a while and then asked, what is the bloodline Thurgi? Number 9527 smiled and explained, this bloodline Thurgi comes from the early stage of chaos. Although you have this Thurgi, whether you can use it or control it depends on how much you can master. As soon as these words were spoken, Zen suddenly felt the sclerite in his chest begin to heat up, and the temperature also rose higher and higher. He soon felt a burning sensation, as if a flame was constantly jumping in his chest. Strange textures in no time were revealed on the diamond-shaped sclerite. The textures turned into a large net and projected into Zen's mind. Afterwards, it slowly surrounded his soul. What's this? Being enveloped by the circular net, he felt as if he had lost contact with his physical body and his soul was trapped in the net. The wild gods who were watching outside the cave saw that Zen had involuntarily taken 2 steps back. His huge body fell on the ground, causing a loud bang. What happened to Zen? Baldwin was caught off guard as he asked. Many wild gods panicked. They had held high regards towards Zen attaining a great achievement in the 9-li race, and his status in the race was incomparably high. The scene had indeed surprised them as he passed out right after becoming a top-rank wild god. Go and inform Grand Elder. Baldwin abruptly gave out an order. Zen was oblivious to what was happening outside as he was still immersed in his own mind. Number 9527 continued to explain, the Chaos Ancient God was lucky to observe the energy of the godly way's great unity in the early stage of chaos. Thus, he comprehended a truth which was in his use. That Thurgi is the truth Thurgi. It could control all the rules in chaos from the beginning to the end, in an unbreakable way. The voice of number 9527 sounded in his own mind. It sounded very illusory when the voice was isolated by the net. The more number 9527 explained, the more he was astonished. It was superior to all rules, which could not be broken from the beginning to the end. What an incredible Thurgi, the energy of the godly way's great unity. Zen had once cultivated the way's blending strike which used to merge all of the 3,000 godly ways in one. But what was the godly way's great unity? It even made the Chaos Ancient God come up with a truth. Buzz. The huge net began to spin, turning into a round ball and enveloping Zen's soul. Then a strange picture, appearing on the inner wall of the ball, unfolded slowly right before Zen's vision. Golden Sanskrit words. Zen was once more stunned looking at the golden words that had appeared in the inner wall of the huge ball. His only concern was that he couldn't understand it. Chapter 2212, Instructions. Except for Jeffrey, Zen hadn't seen anyone else who could read Sanskrit so well, not even his own mother. Of course, Zen couldn't either. He had no knowledge of Sanskrit whatsoever, and the golden Sanskrit words were incomprehensible to him. While Zen was puzzling over the text, the speed at which the golden Sanskrit words spun became faster and faster. Soon they spun so fast that they resembled a rotating bowl of golden juice, splashing around and forming strange images in the air. These images only existed for a moment before they disappeared without a trace, like mirages. About hundreds of images had appeared and disappeared in the course of 3 seconds. What are these images? Zen stared at the changing images, trying to understand. This time, number 9527 just kept silent. Zen hadn't been chosen by the master for nothing. Surely, he must have extraordinary abilities. So number 9527 knew to keep its thoughts to itself and let Zen take the lead. And if Zen couldn't comprehend the images, it would only prove that the master had chosen wrong. Zen furrowed his eyebrows as he stared at the constantly changing images in front of him. He was lost in deep thought. Although this number 9527 fellow's origin was suspicious, Zen did not think it was a liar. He believed that the bloodline theurgy number 9527 had mentioned could be found in these images. How much insight he could get all depended on his ability to decode the images. Since Zen had reached the true God realm, his understanding of the various theurgies and cultivation methods had improved significantly. He had discovered that even the 3,000 godly ways were just different kinds of energy that could be expressed by various different methods. The wild God power, too, was just another form of energy. What made it different, however, was that it depended more on inheritance, because the power of wild gods came not from themselves, but from the energy that had been extracted from the countless wild bones, which was known as the wild god power. After a moment of silence, a ray of light appeared in Zen's eyes. These images are instructions. They show me how to use energy. Zen concluded. Hearing Zen's conclusion, number 9527 felt relieved and impressed. This guy, it thought, smiling to itself. It took him no time to figure that out. It gushed in his mind. Despite being only a small brain unit, number 9527 acted like a vessel for the memory of its master. It had little authority, but that did not reflect its value. It, after all, had been chosen to represent the chaos ancient god. Truth was the most basic component of chaos, and it was not easy to grasp it. Even if one managed to learn what they perceived to be the truth, what they had actually understood was but a tiny fraction of the entire truth. And yet, they would still benefit greatly from it. After Zen had realized what these images meant, his mind suddenly became clear. Now he knew the direction in which he should think, instead of being lost in the middle of a four-way street, not knowing which path to choose. Soon, he descended completely into meditation. Inside the cave, Zen's huge body lay motionless on the ground. Adele floated above Zen's head. Her eyes flashed with a faint glow, and her nervous expression gradually calmed down as she observed him. He looked as if he had fallen into the deep sleep of a meditation state. Adele naturally couldn't figure out why he was in such a state, but as long as he was safe, it didn't matter. However, Adele hadn't thought that Zen would remain lying there for over 10 days. In fact, he remained there for over half a month. With the new moon, Zen's huge body suddenly trembled, and the light ball surrounding his soul suddenly shattered into smithereens. A dark green light constantly flickered from his chest, emitting an intimidating aura. The aura was so strong that even the airtight bone tower couldn't resist. It shook violently. Meanwhile, in the depths of the Sky Spirit Bone Tower, Timotheus, Ramsey, and many other exiles all opened their eyes simultaneously, disbelief all over their faces. This was the second time Zen had endured the body tribulations, so they knew it wouldn't be a challenge for him. Naturally, they did not deem the situation worthy of their attention. However, they had not expected Zen to change so drastically after becoming a top-rank wild god. What happened? Even I must admit, I am afraid of this aura. Is it some kind of truth of godly way? The exiles had relied on the boat of the truth to reach the other shore realm. Their understanding of energy, and how to use it to their advantage, had reached a new level, far beyond that of ordinary creatures. Honestly speaking, the energy Zen gave out was not so powerful itself, far from enough to frighten them. The only thing that could explain their reaction was that the energy was of a nature they had, hitherto, never seen. And the unknown can be, at times, much more frightening than the powerful. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Several exiles appeared before Zen in a synchronized fashion. Staring at Zen below them, their expressions were hard to decipher. What kind of energy is that? Ramsey asked, staring at the green light radiating from Zen's chest. Timotheus shook his head. I don't know, he said pensively. But I am sure this energy is not the bloodline theurgy of our 9 Li race. Then, something occurred to him. Could it be? He trailed off into silence, but Ramsey, Leopold and the others knew what he was thinking. Their expressions looked lost, buried deep in thought. Zen hadn't displayed this ability before, But now, after he had just gone through the body tribulations another time and become a top-rank wild god, he was able to finally display it. Zen had, furthermore, absorbed the bloodline of the Chaos Ancient God. The most likely explanation was clear to them. Zen had activated the bloodline theurgy of the Chaos Ancient God. Timotheus, have you heard of anyone who has managed to gain the Chaos Ancient God's bloodline theurgy? Ramsey asked through his life vitality. Timotheus shook his head. No, among those in the source world, the Chaos Ancient God was an existence that all races looked up to. Although there had been countless talents that had appeared in the source world throughout the years, they had still been unable to reach the level of the Chaos Ancient God, mostly due to the limitations of times. Of course, it might have well been because the level of the exiles had not been high enough, or because the top figures in the source world were not like what they had imagined. While the exiles pondered over these questions, Zen suddenly opened his eyes. Exhaling deeply, he rolled over to get onto his feet. Although he tried to keep himself calm, the excitement in his eyes was obvious. Master Timotheus, Master Ramsey, Master Leopold, he whispered fervently. Zen spread his arms, making the wild god power dissipate. After shrinking back into his normal size, he flew up to them, cupping his hands. Congratulations on breaking through again. It seems like you have gained a lot. I'm curious, what was that energy just now, the one coming from your chest? Timotheus said with a smile. Zen did not have any reservations concerning Timotheus and the others. After all, they were of the same race as him, and they had known each other for so long. He knew they could be trusted. Zen stretched out his hand towards Timotheus and opened his palm. An emerald green light lit up like a flame, dancing in the palm of his hand. It circled around, and formed a small emerald green block. Is this the energy that you asked about? Chapter 2213, Storming the Torrent Bone Tower. The green block looked quite ordinary, nothing special. However, there was a hint of excitement in the eyes of Timotheus and the others. Is this the inheritance from the Chaos Ancient God? Asked Timotheus with his greedy eyes shining. Zen raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, Did you know about it, Master Timotheus? Timotheus nodded and said, I already guessed it when you went through the body tribulations last time, but I didn't think you would be able to obtain the inheritance in such a short period of time. It's remarkable. Timotheus didn't continue. Even Ramsey and his companions tried their best to suppress their curiosity. This was Zen's secret, and they were being rude by prying. The exiles had no idea about the Chaos Ancient God's purpose, but it was not a bad thing for the Nine Li race. In fact, it was a blessing in their eyes. After Timotheus and the others left, Zen asked for a quiet place to continue his research on that energy. You're very talented to be able to grasp a truth crystal in just half a month, number 9527 commented. But don't get too excited yet. A complete truth is like a towering tree, and what you have mastered is only the smallest root. You can't display its power yet. Zen nodded. Although the square truth crystal was indeed mysterious, it was not so powerful as Zen's own energy to fuse the godly ways. Don't worry, I will teach you how to use the truth crystal, number 9527 added. The truth crystal was the bloodline theurgy of the Chaos Ancient God. After he observed the godly ways' great unity, he had comprehended his truth himself, and then integrated it into his bloodline. Using this truth crystal, or the bloodline theurgy, was very important. Next, Zen would continue to cultivate tirelessly. The time for the arrival of the light of adjudication was drawing near. The atmosphere in the bone tower grew intense. When the light of adjudication finally came, all the wild gods in the world, except the major races inside the bone towers, would be obliterated. According to past experience, most of the wild gods would experience the light of adjudication without even knowing. They would only have a few seconds left by the time they realized that the light of adjudication had arrived. Then they would see themselves, their peers, even their brothers and sisters turn into dust in the dazzling light. They would even see themselves turn into dust and disappear from this world. Some of the wild gods who knew the truth tried desperately to dash into the bone towers as fast as they could. Generally speaking, the wild gods would never reveal the news of the light of adjudication arriving because that meant having one more opponent to compete with for entering the bone tower. It significantly diminished their chances. So none of the wild gods were foolish enough to divulge this information. However, something changed not long before the arrival of the light of adjudication this time. A nasty piece of gossip suddenly began to spread everywhere crazily, especially in those remote cities. As it was a very juicy and shocking piece of information, it spread rapidly. Before the light of adjudication had fallen on this world, the members of the various big races had managed to return to the bone towers, and they didn't notice it at the very beginning. The gossip spread across all the cities like wildfire. All the wild gods knew of the existence of the light of adjudication, as well as the fate of those being eliminated, and the fact that the bone towers was their shelter. Everyone was in a state of panic. In the towering city, hundreds of thousands of wild gods had gathered close to the snake goddess race's torrent bone tower. The wild gods were seething and filled with righteous indignation. A sturdy middle-aged man looked down at the people on the city wall and shouted, "The big races are hiding in the bone towers to seek refuge, and so is our city lord. Only we, lowly people, are waiting for death here. Why should we? Who wants to wait for death? Not me. Me neither. No one wants to wait for death." Hundreds of thousands of wild gods answered in an enraged chorus. The middle-aged man continued, "But our strength is far inferior to that of the people of the snake goddess race. If we attack the bone tower, we will surely be killed. But in the end, a small number of people will be able to break into the bone tower, so that a few of us can survive. Will you take a chance? We will die anyway, why don't we give it a try? Yes, we're bound to die if we stay here. If we get lucky and are able to break through to the bone tower, we might have a chance to save our lives." Quote. The only thought that occupied the minds of the wild gods right now was survival. They certainly knew that it was not easy to deal with the large race in the bone tower. However, once they knew that they would definitely die, all of their scruples and fears had vanished. Now their survival instincts had kicked in. When they were not even afraid of death, how could they be afraid of the big races? Then what are you waiting for? The middle-aged man roared again. Charge! Force your way into the torrent bone tower and make them take us in. I'm going in even if I have to kill. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Hundreds of thousands of wild gods rushed toward the bone tower in a mad frenzy. As the middle-aged man gazed at the tide of people rushing to the torrent bone tower in the distance, a smug smile appeared on his face. He leaned against the wall, and muttered, "According to our agreement, your yellow emperor race has to take me in." Not far away, in the darkness of the city wall, a thin young man strolled outside. He was none other than Roy, a member of the yellow emperor race. Roy was entrusted with the duty of spreading the news of the light of adjudication in the towering city. Naturally, he'd better not show up. So he had found this middle-aged man who had a high reputation in the city. Roy had promised this middle-aged man that he would be able to join the Yellow Emperor race and seek refuge in their bone tower if he instigated the wild gods to charge into the torrent bone tower. His strategy had been a success. "Sorry, our Yellow Emperor race's bone tower will not be able to contain so many people," Roy said with an evil grin. The man's face darkened. He stared at Roy and snapped, "But you promised me." "So what?" Roy said lightly, "You can also storm into the torrent bone tower with them. Maybe you'll have a chance to live." You traitor, I'll fight it out with you." The middle-aged man flew into a rage and began to activate the wild god power within his body to fight his backstabbing opponent. But before he could begin to swell up, Roy had already turned into a streak of light and flown past him. The middle-aged man's eyes widened in surprise and his body stiffened. At the same time, blood gushed out from Roy's fingertips. Thud! The middle-aged man fell to the ground, and Roy gently shook his right hand to clean off the bloodstains on it. He looked at the middle-aged man's corpse and said, "Why did you force me to do that? As a lowly person in the wilderness, you should accept your death by the light of adjudication." Then, Roy disappeared into the darkness again. Such things happened often in all big cities. All the cities and the wild gods within the territory of the snake goddess race were encouraged by the Yellow Emperor race. For the first time, 10 million wild gods rushed towards the torrent bone tower. Chapter 2214, Cold-Blooded. This kind of situation not only happened in the territory of the snake goddess race. There were countless wild gods in the Nine-Li race, Star Deer race and other main races that were instigated by the Yellow Emperor race. However, for the Yellow Emperor race, the snake goddess race was their ultimate goal. Under the torrent bone tower, about 10 million people had activated the wild god power. They transformed themselves into figures of a few thousand or tens of thousands of feet high. They all piled up and formed into a layer of wall, blocking the entrance of the bone tower completely. At the entrance of the torrent bone tower, 6 elders from the snake goddess race were fiercely guarding the place. How could this be even possible? Who has spread the news of light of adjudication? An old woman with a hunchback exclaimed angrily. Previously, before the light of adjudication descended, a small number of wild gods would try to break into the bone towers, but it would be dozens or hundreds of people at the most. Depending on the situation, the snake goddess race would either selectively choose a part of them to let them stay or mercilessly just kill them all. But this time, things were different. All the wild gods in the territory of the snake goddess race were present. Now the situation became more complicated. Even though the torrent bone tower was considerably large, it was difficult to accommodate so many wild gods. Someone is deliberately spreading the news. We are yet to make out the intentions for the attempt, an astonished female elder commented. What can be their purpose? Asked another woman coolly. The former lady snorted coldly. Isn't it clear? Their reason could be the two people from the warden race. The snake goddess race had accepted those two people, fully aware of the consequences that they would have to face. It was as good as announcing a war on the warden race. However, they assumed that the real confrontation would come only after the light of adjudication descended. They never expected that they would use such tricks before that. That cannot be possible. The warden race obviously doesn't have so many people. Is it even possible for them to instigate so many people in such a short time? The enchanting female elder commented with a tinge of doubt. Besides, the warden race rarely revealed themselves to others. They were always mysterious, so it would be difficult for them to convince so many people in a short time. As the elders continued to speculate, a circle of light, resembling a rainbow, appeared behind them. Emily's voice faintly floated over. This is not the deed done by the warden race. Master, Master. The female elders bowed down to Emily with reverence. Emily nodded slightly and looked at the dense crowd of wild gods with a puzzled look. If it is not the warden race who instigated these people, who did it? The old lady asked. The crystal light in Emily's eyes flashed. With a sneer she said, not all the races were invited by us. For example, the Yellow Emperor race is excluded. Master, do you mean to say that this is the doing of the Yellow Emperor race? The old lady asked in bafflement. The other elders present were equally stunned with Emily's claim. The elder with a cool expression asked, is the Yellow Emperor race trying to court death? The snake goddess race was the most powerful race in this world, and no race dared to provoke them so far. Even the Yellow Emperor race was no match for the snake goddess race. That was why all the elders were shocked at this revelation. The consequences of provoking the snake goddess race could be imagined. The Nine Li race doesn't allow the Yellow Emperor race to join our escape plan. Under this situation, if the warden race gives them an olive branch, what will you do if you were in their place? Emily asked. These elders immediately understood what happened. This was actually a counterattack from the warden race, but they used the Yellow Emperor race as their pawn. In fact, not only the Yellow Emperor race, but even some small races who did not join us, are likely to help the warden race. Their ultimate goal is the two people from the warden race. While speaking, Emily had a gleam in her eyes. Zen is right, I have been looking forward to the warden race's counterattack. The elders were bewildered hearing Emily's comment. The old lady asked, why do you say that, Master? Emily asked, if Luther and Zelda are on our side, but the warden race do nothing about it, what do you think the reason can be? The old lady thought for a while, then her eyes suddenly lit up. It means that Luther and Zelda are of little significance for them. Yes, if they did nothing, it must mean that Luther and Zelda are hardly of any help for us to leave this world. Hence the warden race wouldn't care about them at all. That is the most terrible situation to be in. As Emily spoke, she gently stepped forward and continued, but now that the warden race have allied with the Yellow Emperor race, along with the smaller races, it must mean that they are now afraid. At the same time, it also means that Luther and Zelda have the ability to help us leave this world. Then how do we deal with these wild gods? The old lady asked. Emily shook her head and said, it's very likely that the Yellow Emperor race have arranged certain people to lurk among these wild gods. Their ultimate goal is to enter the Bone Tower. And we can't let them achieve that. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Every time Emily moved about, a rainbow-hued ripple would spread from the tip of her feet, producing a faint buzzing sound. At the same time as the ripple spread, her body also doubled in size. By merely taking a few dozen steps, she became a humongous wild god, towering at 5 million feet tall. She looked down at the dense crowds of the wild gods and spoke in a cold and clear voice, everyone should immediately leave our torrent bone tower as soon as possible. Otherwise, it will be your doomsday. The old lady and several other female elders were shocked at Emily's words. They looked at each other and took a deep breath. It was clearly evident that Emily was on a bloodbath mission. They were well aware that Emily had the potential and strength to kill so many wild gods, but they didn't expect her to really do so. There were over 10 million warriors in this place. These several elders were born and grew up in this world after all. Although they regarded the wild gods as people of wilderness, it was still difficult for them to kill 10 million living creatures. Emily and Timotheus, who were powerful warriors among the exiles, had already regarded ordinary creatures as weeds. In order to leave here, they wouldn't hesitate even if they were to kill 10 times the number of people present. Until now, the wild gods who gathered had a sliver of hope that the snake goddess race would be benevolent and allow them to stay in the Torrent Bone Tower. That was why they didn't rush into the tower immediately. But now when they heard Emily speak, their hearts sank. "We belong to the territory of the snake goddess race. How can you bear to watch us die? I would rather be killed by you than be cleansed by the light of adjudication." These people knew their fate, but who would be willing to accept it? Sounds of begging, shouting, and roaring reverberated in the air. The whole place was in chaos. There were rage and disappointment among the people. Everyone present were torn between emotions. Nobody knew who took the lead, but suddenly some of them rushed towards the entrance of the Torrent Bone Tower, and more wild gods followed. All the wild gods united as a force and dashed towards the Torrent Bone Tower behind Emily like a torrent. Witnessing the changing scene down below, Emily slightly shook her head and sighed, "Don't blame me for being cold-blooded then." Chapter 2215, The Superior's Strategy. People in higher positions were, generally speaking, usually more apathetic. Despite that, it didn't go to say that such warriors were cruel and bloodthirsty individuals, but compelled by certain circumstances, they were obliged to make important decisions. Emily had never been considered ruthless or barbaric, but right now, she didn't hesitate in the least. "Buzz," she suddenly and forcefully pointed at the crowd. Not far ahead of her, a beam of colorful light had begun to make its appearance. As it became brighter and brighter, the colorful light resembled a colorful little snake, slithering in the air. Its head slowly began chasing its tail, until it was connected end to end, forming a ring. The beam of light gained speed until it was spinning extremely fast. As it spun at the highest of speeds, it emitted a horrifying aura. A few wild gods halted and froze as they felt the horrifying aura creep over them, fear etched on their faces. "What kind of method is that? I'm afraid it's even more powerful than the light of adjudication itself. If someone were to be strangled by the ring of light, they would definitely die." Before long, these fearful voices were drowned out by others who were more confident in their words. "We have so many warriors here. She might not even dare kill us." "You're right, she can't kill us all, that's for sure. Don't be afraid, let's charge together at once." The wild gods' eyes had turned red with emotion. They knew very well that their only chance of survival was entering the Bone Tower. The desire and will to live had already completely suppressed the fear they felt in their hearts. Whoosh, 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 one after the next, the wild gods rushed forward without stopping. On the contrary, they picked up as much speed as they possibly could. "I don't dare kill anyone." A faint smile could be seen on Emily's face. Her right hand made a grab at the ring of light and then gave a slight twist. Crash, crash, in an instant, the ring of light suddenly began to emit a forceful suction. So much so, in fact, that the suction was too strong to resist. It didn't matter anymore whether the wild gods were several thousand feet high, or even tens of thousands of feet, they only felt a terrifying suction take over them. Even when unleashing their strongest power, they still couldn't manage to break free. They felt themselves gradually being absorbed by the suction and they couldn't help it in the least. Crack, crack, crack. Once the wild gods, who were as tall as mountains, had been sucked into the ring of light, their previously intact bodies were shattered into pieces in the blink of an eye. They didn't even have the time to scream before dying, and if they did utter a heartrending cry, their voices were all sucked in by the ring. How terrifyingly horrible. Let's leave. Go. Hurry up. What a cruel, disgusting method. She really does intend to kill every single one of us. No, I don't want to give up. When the wild gods ahead saw what was going on, they began speaking to one another, turning pale with regret. But it was already too late. For the wild gods trailing behind, there remained a glimmer of hope in their hearts. They kept running forward. They didn't know that this path led directly to death. From afar, the huge ring of light could be described as a death god, repeatedly cutting off the wild gods' lives. The wild gods were all acting like terrified moths, darting into the flames. The moment they had decided to storm the Torrent Bone Tower, their fate had already been determined. The elders of the snake goddess race just stood there, motionlessly. Even their expressions appeared frozen in place. Although these warriors could only blame themselves for storming the Torrent Bone Tower, they were still living under the snake goddess race's control. They therefore had several connection with the sects belonging to this race. Now, their leader, Emily, had made a move. They knew she would slaughter 1 million, or 10 million wild gods. Their hearts were, without a doubt, very heavy. In spite of how they were feeling, they also knew that their leader had no other choice. At this juncture, the slightest mercy toward these people was in turn, being cruel to themselves as well as the snake goddess race. Tens of thousands of miles away from the Torrent Bone Tower, Roy was hiding beneath the sand, covered by a light brown cloth. The cloth could restrain his breath completely. The exile's senses were just too powerful. Even though he was far away from them, he knew that he had to be very cautious. It's unbelievable that she's trying to kill them all. What a bold and resolute woman, I must say. Staring at the huge ring, Roy couldn't help the expression of fear on his face. It seemed that their Yellow Emperor race's plan would fall through. He wondered what the exiles of his race thought of the current situation. On the mountain located in the Yellow Emperor race's Pyramid Bone Tower, several exiles stood in the air, while Spark, who was dressed in black, sat at its peak. Emily is so brutal, does she really intend on killing everyone down there? Asked one of the Yellow Emperor race's exiles, with a melancholic expression. At first, the exiles had believed that their actions would work. At the very least, they had succeeded in instigating a ton of wild gods to attack the Torrent Bone Tower. Now though, their efforts seemed more like an egg-smashing stone, having no effect whatsoever. Spark smiled casually and said, "Don't worry. She won't kill everyone." "And why is that, Spark? How do you know such a thing?" asked another exile. Spark held 2 black beads in his hand. The bead's surface was smooth and shiny. If one looked at it carefully, it was like staring into a living creature's pupil. When the 2 beads were rolling in his hand, Spark replied, "Just put yourself in her shoes." As a leader of the snake goddess race, Emily would come off as too cruel if she slaughtered millions of people. In order to balance her image among her race, what do you think she'll have to do? One of the exiles thought for a moment and then said, "She'll spare the lives of a few wild gods and even save their lives." Spark agreed flatly, "Yes, she won't kill all of the wild gods, but will instead save a few of them in order to demonstrate her kindness. It's the superior strategy." Several of the other surrounding exiles were suddenly enlightened by his explanation. "In other words, if I understand correctly, we should arrange our assassins within the last batch of the wild gods." "Is that right?" another exile asked. "Correct," Spark nodded, "but even if our assassins succeed in entering the Torrent Bone Tower, they still won't have the chance to make a move." An exile expressed his worry as he frowned at the others. Even if the snake goddess race brought a few of the wild gods to the Bone Tower, she would order her people to watch over them like hawks. It was almost impossible for the assassins hiding within the group to escape, nor would they have the chance to kill the siblings. It was difficult to even find them. "Of course not," agreed Spark with a calm look on his face. "Then tell us, Spark, what's your real purpose?" These exiles were quickly confused by Spark's words. In their eyes, what Spark planned was useless. However, as smart as he was, they knew he would never do such a thing as waste his time. "Just watch for yourself, and you'll see," said Spark, a confident expression taking over his handsome face. The ring of light summoned by Emily had, up to this point, successfully killed more than 9 million wild gods at the foot of the Torrent Bone Tower. These wild gods didn't even leave their corpses. Instead, they were immediately ground into dust and disappeared from this world. At last, when there were about 20 or 30,000 wild gods remaining outside the Bone Tower, the Ring of Light, which symbolized death, finally stopped rotating. Chapter 2216, Assassins. The wild gods thought that they would definitely die. But out of a sudden, the suction force had immediately disappeared. They all felt as if their lives had been spared, and they quickly retreated. A narrow escape from death. For a moment, the wild gods had shared the same thought as they felt lucky evading certain life and death situation. Emily's voice faintly came through, "We snake goddess race take charge of the Torrent Bone Tower. But we are not heartless people who would like to see you die. It's just that the space inside the tower is limited, and it's impossible to save so many people's lives in this world. You can hide in Torrent Bone Tower temporarily." The tens of thousands of wild gods were already scared to death that all of them were in panic running for their lives. Although they would also die outside the Bone Tower, they could live a few more days outside. It was their instinct to make such a choice. However, when they were running for their lives, they suddenly heard Emily's words. All the figures that were running suddenly halted and their faces were filled with disbelief. Looks of hesitation and doubt had gradually showed on each one's faces. "Is she lying to us? Don't be fooled by her. She is lying. When we come back, she's gonna kill us. Humph, she has killed almost 10 million people in a short time. If she really wants to kill us, it won't take too much efforts for her. You are not qualified to make her fool us. The people discussed and came upon an agreement with the idea. If it weren't for the exile of the snake goddess race who had stopped, the remaining 20,000 or 30,000 people might have already been killed. There was no need for such a powerful master to cheat on them. Their faces gradually appeared overjoyed in ecstasy realizing this. It was beyond their expectation that they would be invited by the snake goddess race to temporarily take shelter inside the bone tower. Among 10 million warriors, 20 or 30,000 people entered the torrent bone tower. They were very lucky. But unbeknownst the crowd, two people quietly exchanged glances. These two men were the assassins arranged by Spark. As Spark had ordered, they hid and blended among the last group of wild gods. The situation moments ago had made them feel desperate. They were unable to break free from the circle of light, and in the end, they would be both shattered into pieces like the others. The two assassins had dared sneak into the torrent bone tower and were given the mission to assassinate Zelda and Luther. Spark in return had promised them that their family would be ensured to be given a good life. As assassins, they were naturally prepared to sacrifice themselves. But this time, their sacrifice would be deemed unworthy if they died before they could even enter the torrent bone tower. To their surprise, Spark truly had superb foresight as Emily really stopped. "Master Emily, are you really going to let them in?" An old lady had a look of deep worry on her face as she asked. "You have a gentle heart, Master. But you really don't have to care about these pariahs, to avoid any unnecessary troubles in the future," another elder advised. Emily smiled faintly. "It's enough. There's no need to kill everyone. It won't be a big problem even if I let these wild gods enter the torrent bone tower. You just need to strengthen the security. Just don't let these people walk around in the bone tower casually." She had just killed almost 10 million people, but now she was praised as having a gentle heart. This was the reason why she spared the lives of the remaining 20 or 30,000 people. Being too cruel and bloodthirsty didn't seem to be appropriate for the leader of the snake goddess race. Under the gaze of the snake goddess members, more than 20,000 wild gods entered the bone tower in order. The two assassins sent by Spark were both included mixed up with the wild gods. A separate area in the bone tower had been arranged and prepared for the wild gods to temporarily stay for the meantime. The two assassins had been discreetly observing the interior of the torrent bone tower as they followed the crowd. A group of snake goddess members stood on the high platform. They were held responsible for monitoring the wild gods. After everyone had entered, an elder of the snake goddess race floated above and coldly announced, "You guys must have known your current situation very well. It's your great honor that our torrent bone tower is willing to accept you. I hope you can live through this period of time in peace until the light of adjudication is over. Anyone who dares to have unusual movements will be killed." The wild gods were silent as they listened to the words of the elder. How could they dare do anything else? They had already been lucky to keep their lives and much more had been provided as shelter. They were already satisfied. Everyone sat and listened in peace without objections. With everything that needed to be announced and reminded were said, the elder of the snake goddess race left. The two assassins were in deep thought as they looked at each other. When Spark gave them the task, they were both confused. Even if they managed to sneak into the bone tower, it would be difficult finding the right timing and opportunity to kill Zelda and Luther. It was almost impossible to kill them under the watchful eyes of the exiles. Despite how difficult it was, they must execute the task given to them as soon as they spotted even a tiny chance to take action. They could only do as what Spark had ordered. After an hour had passed, one of the assassins suddenly made a gesture. His fellow assassin nodded with an expression showing that they were ready and would risk everything to accomplish their task. "Go!" The first assassin suddenly cried out and activated his wild god power. He transformed into the size of 20,000 feet tall and rushed towards the depth of the cave. "Go to perdition!" Several snake goddess members' faces darkened. They quickly activated the wild god power and chased after the first assassin. The first assassin attracted most of the people's attention, and the second assassin just silently followed. The latter suddenly burst forth with an astonishing speed and rushed to another direction. In front of the assassin's forehead gathered a mass of black aura. The black aura was given to him by the warden race. Through this black aura, he could detect the location of both Luther and Zelda. He could sense that Luther and Zelda were not far from where he was. It was only dozens of miles away. As long as they were killed, everything would be over. In the blink of an eye, the second assassin had already rushed over a dozen miles. Meanwhile, dozens of miles away, a figure was seated on a cyan stone platform and attentively cultivating. It was Luther. He had already successfully reached the mid-rank true god realm in such a short period of time. As days passed by, he had surely made fast progress. All this should be attributed to Emily. Who? His concentration was suddenly interrupted by a deafening whistling sound of wind. Just at the right time, he sensed and saw a wild god rushing towards him from afar. The bloodline mark. The sudden intrusion made him alert as his eyebrows jumped up. Because of the black aura on his forehead, which was also the bloodline mark that Luther had referred to, the assassin could now clearly detect Luther's existence. Luther, on the other hand, could as well sense the black aura being emitted from the figure coming straight towards him. In an instant, he realized that the wild god was coming at him for an attack. The assassin's speed was extremely fast. Even if the other snake goddess members realized what was happening, it was already too late to stop him. Just as the assassin was about a few miles away from Luther, a rainbow-like light flashed out and shot towards him. Facing a sudden attack, the assassin's huge body had no time to dodge since he had been keeping a high speed in running. Having no time to analyze what had happened, his body was already split into half. Emily's figure quietly appeared in front of Luther. She frowned and looked at the assassin. That's nothing impressive. Although she knew that Spark would play tricks, she had the feeling that it was not so simple. Chapter 2217, Killed. Luther walked up to Emily and looked around at the body that she had cut in two. He then said sorrowfully, "This man had the bloodline mark. He could find me as long as he was within a certain radius of me. The warden race has started." The bloodline mark seemed to have a comparatively small range of perception. Luther and Zelda couldn't have escaped the hunt of the warden race otherwise. Emily glanced at Luther before saying, "It's not just the warden race. Did any other great races join them?" Luther asked, grinning. He was quite optimistic. "Don't worry," Emily said, grinning back at him. "I will keep you safe." It was at this moment that several elders and some of the exiles of the snake goddess race arrived at the scene. Luther's sister, Zelda, was the last to arrive. Everyone knew how important Luther was. And now that Luther had been attacked, nervousness crept up on all of them. But they were even more nervous because of Emily, whose eyes roved over them. And it was her who brought the hidden dangers in the crowd. "Master Emily, should we bring Luther to a more secluded place?" an elder asked. Zelda shook her head. "I felt the bloodline mark too. As long as we are in this bone tower, there's no point hiding him." At the worried faces of the crowd, Emily smiled and said, "Don't worry. Both the Yellow Emperor race and the Warden race only dare act in the dark. Now that I'm here, there's nothing they can do." Emily was the strongest exile in this world. Only Spark of the Yellow Emperor race and Timotheus of the Nine-Li race could come close to even being second to her. She was confident about her own strength. Everyone nodded. There was no point in hiding him if Emily couldn't protect him. But a space vortex appeared behind them, and Timotheus emerged from it. During other times, exiles weren't allowed to enter the bone tower of the snake goddess race without permission. But these times were different. Top-ranking races were now looking after each other, according to their agreement. So they weren't bothered about the rules. The moment he appeared, Timotheus's face darkened as he saw the assassin's body. "Emily, are you all right here?" The Sky Spirit Bone Tower was also under siege by the wild gods. Timotheus was worried about the snake goddess race, once he had dealt with the wild gods. Emily smiled and replied, "Just some ants. They have been taken care of." Timotheus nodded and then sneered, "Spark is so stupid to have used such a naive trick." The space around the crowd began to fluctuate again. The exiles of the Star Deer race, the Fire Melting race, and the Southern Dipper race appeared in quick succession. Like Timotheus, they expressed their concerns with Luther and Zelda. Some of them were ready to give up their bone towers and clansmen, if it meant that Luther and Zelda didn't die. It was pretty obvious how important Luther and Zelda were to them. But when they learned about what had happened, they were all relieved. Spark has always been cunning. But this time, his idea was so bad. The Warden race takes Luther and Zelda very seriously. It looks like we are likely to succeed this time. We will set out once the light of adjudication is over. In this pleasantly hopeful atmosphere, Levi Zhuang, one of the Star Deer race's exiles, took 2 steps towards Luther. "They have attacked for the first time, and I'm sure they will do it a second time. We'd better be careful. How about I use my Thurgy to create a small piece of land to protect Luther?" he said. Emily and Timotheus frowned and looked at each other. Emily shook her head and said, "Why bother? It's unnecessary." "Really?" Levi Zhuang had barely finished talking when there was a sudden flash of black light in his eyes. Whoosh, he suddenly stretched out his arms, extending them towards Luther. What are you doing, Levi Zhuang? How dare you? Stop it. The exiles belonging to the other races were all shocked. As an exile, Levi Zhuang could move at an amazingly fast speed. People like the elders of the snake goddess race couldn't react. Neither could Luther. Levi Zhuang was faster than lightning. In the blink of an eye, he had grasped Luther's head in his hand and with a gentle pull, separated it from Luther's body. Levi Zhuang crushed Luther's head in his hands and before long, it had become a mass of blood. Luther was dead. Levi Zhuang laughed and floated in the air, distancing himself from the other exiles. Emily and Timotheus were frozen to their spots as they stared at Levi Zhuang. I'm sorry, Emily, Timotheus, Levi Zhuang said with a wry smile, holding Luther's mutilated head in one hand. There are only a limited number of people who can leave this world, and I want to fight for one. Emily stared coldly at him, fury enveloping her every nerve. If we make it, you can leave too. Why do you still fight for the warden race? Levi Zhuang waved the head in his hand and said, because you are doomed to fail. I don't think you can succeed. It turns out I'm right. You've already failed. I'm going to trade his head for a place to leave. Why wouldn't I do this? Spark hadn't expected the assassins of the wild gods to finish the task. The only reason he had tried so hard was to create a reasonable opportunity for other exiles to visit the Torrent Bone Tower. And before that, Spark had given Levi Zhuang his promise. As long as Levi Zhuang killed that young man, the warden race would let him go. He hesitated for a while before he had made his decision, choosing to betray his companions. The two assassins had used the warden race's bloodline mark to determine Luther's location. Levi Zhuang had then taken the opportunity to visit the snake goddess race and when they'd relaxed their guard, had killed Luther. This method was direct, but effective. Emily sighed and shook her head. You're wrong. You had the chance to leave with us. At these words, Levi Zhuang was suddenly uneasy. He gripped the head tightly and said, Luther's already dead. Do you still have the chance? Timotheus grinned and said, you should be the one to die. As he spoke, the blood on the head in Levi Zhuang's hand turned into wisps of black mists, and wrapped around him like little snakes. Chapter 2218, Purifying the World. An exile as talented as Levi could travel 100 million miles away in an instant. His talent didn't matter right now, though. As soon as the small, black, snake-like mists twined around his body, they held him firmly in place. That is the spiritual snake parasite. Emily, you. Levi glanced at Emily nervously and confusedly. The spiritual snake parasite was an extremely powerful technique. When performed by Emily in particular, it was even more impressive. When intertwined by the latter, even the other Shore Realm master couldn't escape. The problem was that when Emily would use the spiritual snake parasite on Luther, he would be bound to death. Could this mean that she had the intention of sacrificing him since the very beginning? How could she single him out? How did she choose to sacrifice Luther? Levi simply couldn't figure it out. It was incomprehensible. Do you find it strange? A smile finally spread across Emily's lips, brightening her already beautiful face. Were you truly willing to kill Luther? Levi asked, as he continued struggling to get free. Why wouldn't I? Emily's smile widened and she clapped her hands together at once. Not too far away, a figure could be seen slowly floating over to them. As the figure approached, they could see that it was Luther, equally wearing a smile on his face. As he looked at the approaching young man, Levi frowned and shook his head simultaneously. It's impossible. They used the bloodline mark to confirm him. The one I killed couldn't have been a fake. And who said he was a fake? Emily clapped her hands loudly again. Several other youths crept out from the other side where they had been hiding. They moved very slowly. They all had the exact same appearance, manner, and even cultivation base. They were all Luther. As the many Luther copies walked gradually forward, Emily continued, the moment I took him into the Bone Tower, I knew that there would be traitors. It's just that I couldn't be wary of everyone, and thus, I just let you expose yourselves instead. You did kill Luther himself, but I have a dozen of him. Levi's jaw clenched and trembled as she spoke. It isn't difficult for our snake goddess race to create the same bloodline, the same appearance, and even the same memories. Aren't I right? Emily went on speaking, the smile on her lips never disappearing. Levi remained silent for a short while. No matter what, he had failed. As the realization that he couldn't escape death washed over him, his eyes suddenly lit up with two flame clouds. Sizzle, sizzle, deep gold blazing flames rose on the surface of his entire body. The scorching temperature from the fire quickly spread out, causing the temperature of the entire cave to rise rapidly. Ultimately understanding that there was no possible escape, Levi was determined to give it his all. The other elders of the snake goddess race had all retreated. Emily sneered, "Is resisting really worthwhile at this point?" With no warning whatsoever, a dazzling light shot out from her fingertips and enveloped Levi completely. Among all the exiles, Levi was definitely not the weakest, but he had no chance of fighting back now. When Timotheus noticed what was going on, he too felt secretly shocked. Despite the fact that he knew he had the capacity to kill Levi, he was also well aware that doing so wouldn't be the easiest of tasks. Although Levi knew Emily was more powerful than him, he hadn't expected that after all these years, Emily's strength would have become so unfathomable. Who? The light wrapped tightly around Levi suddenly swelled before beginning to contract rapidly and dramatically. When the light couldn't become any smaller, a screech sounded loudly and Levi disappeared, leaving no trace behind. The fact that Emily had just killed a master of the other shore realm so easily shocked the exiles of other races. As they watched, their pupils dilated vaguely, and fear could be seen in their eyes. "Even now, I still can't completely trust all of you," Emily uttered, looking around at the remaining exiles. "I hope you can seize the opportunity this time around. If you choose to turn to the other side, that's your right, but I believe you'd regret such a decision." As she finished speaking, she took 2 light steps forward. A rainbow appeared in front of her and she climbed into it immediately. Well, Levi betrayed us and he thus deserved it. Just moments ago, I still thought that Luther was really dead. I've never been so startled. Same here. Confronted by Levi's death, the exiles on scene sighed loudly, shaking their heads in remorse. "Everybody, we'd better stay in our own bone tower, and don't pull any stupid tricks. Let's wait until the light of adjudication is over." To avoid suspicion, Timotheus said to the crowd. Even he exclaimed that it was a wise choice to have come to the snake goddess race to persuade this race to join him. It was likely that protecting Luther with the 9 Li race alone was going to be a difficult feat. At that, all the exiles left the Torrent Bone Tower, ready to receive the light of adjudication. Inside the Pyramid Bone Tower, Spark still sat on the mountain's peak. Now, there was no expression on his calm face. By contrast, the other exiles of the Yellow Emperor race all wore dark, somber expressions. "I thought it'd be easy for Levi to succeed at such a short distance. I didn't expect that Emily would be even more cunning. She is absolutely formidable. Today, we've succeeded in completely offending the snake goddess race. If they come looking for trouble after the light of adjudication, that will really be a cause for concern. Spark, tell us, what do you think we should do?" Although these exiles had firmly and devotedly followed Spark, they were still afraid of the snake goddess race and Emily, and with reason. As he heard the question being asked, Spark raised his eyebrows slightly. "Looking for trouble? They are too busy escaping the world to come looking for us." After hearing what Spark had to say, the other exiles still didn't change their sullen expressions. At that exact moment though, the man sporting a black robe from the Warden race appeared at the top of the mountain again. The black-robed man looked down upon Spark and stated flatly, "You failed." Spark simply blinked his eyes and answered, "It's perfectly normal. Emily is a very vigilant person. In fact, it would be strange if I succeeded easily." "What's your next move going to be, then?" the black-robed man questioned. In terms of the strategy for assassinating Luther, the Warden race wasn't much helpful. All they did was plant a bloodline mark in the assassin's mind. They weren't prepared for the dozen Luther replicates that Emily had created. "We'll discuss that after the light of adjudication is over," said Spark, with a gleam of danger in his eyes. "That said, you'll have to give me more authority and help. Otherwise, it'll be difficult to deal with that crazy woman on my own." Emily was extremely powerful. Clearly, even Spark was afraid of facing such a woman without immediate backup. "Okay," the black-robed man answered in a faint voice, "I just hope you won't disappoint me." At that, he slowly disappeared. 3 days later, a milky white light slowly rose from the east of the world. It gradually made its way toward the west. The light contained the power of purification, which was almost infinite. Its power would purify all living creatures, except for the unintelligent whites. No matter if one flew to the top of the world or hid in the deepest underground cave, escaping the fate of being purified was completely impossible. Aside from those who hid in the bone towers, the other creatures could hide nowhere but accept their situation, waiting for the purification to come to them. Chapter 2219, The End of the World. The cities that used to be noisy were now completely silent. The creatures outside the bone towers had lived in the cities for 1,000 years before being wiped out by the light of adjudication. Nobody knew how many cycles of reincarnation the world had experienced. All the races living in the bone towers were accustomed to such scenes and results. Previous experience dictated that the whites would slowly and steadily become intelligent, and then, under the guidance of the races, step into the empty cities, cultivating the wild god system. Among them, a very small number of excellent warriors could enter the bone towers. But this time, the situation was completely different. The exiles in the bone towers were eager to take action. The shared goal of the big races led by the snake goddess race and the Nine Li race was to defeat the warden race and escape from this world. The races that were led by the Yellow Emperor race also wanted to escape from this world, but their goal was to stop the snake goddess race and the Nine Li race. There was an irreconcilable conflict between the two forces. Both sides were clear about the fact that the new cycle of reincarnation that would happen in the next 1,000 years was destined to be different from those in the past. In the Sky Spirit Bone Tower, all the members of the Nine Li race had gathered in the square. Timotheus stood before them, outwardly calm but excited from within. As members of our race, you must have a clear understanding of our race's background, he said, his voice loud and clear. Ramsey, Leopold, and I came from a wider world, the Source world. It is our hometown. I've wanted to leave this world the moment I entered it, but I never had the chance. But now, there is an opportunity. The members of the Nine Li race started at Timotheus' words. Apart from Zen and the exiles, all of the wild gods were born in this world. There probably were a few wild gods who were interested in the outside of this world. But there were many who weren't. They had grown up in the bone tower. They were aboriginals and spent their days in a carefree languor. I know that some of you don't want to leave this world, Timotheus continued. I won't force you to follow me. If you are willing to stay, you can stay in the bone tower. The wild gods who didn't want to leave didn't relax at this. The reason why the Nine Li race could be a leading race in this world was that these exiles were extremely powerful. If they left this world, the rest of the wild gods could not maintain the glory of the race. Before long, they would lose control of the Sky Spirit Bone Tower and be expelled or worse, killed, by the exiles of other races. So even though they were unwilling to leave, they were still determined to follow Timotheus and the exiles. I'll give you 6 hours to think about it. Those who want to leave should pack your stuff. We will meet outside the Sky Spirit Bone Tower in 6 hours. With that, Timotheus flew towards the exit of the Sky Spirit Bone Tower. Along with him were several exiles, elders, and executives of the race. Zen was one of them. Yes, the purified air is so different, so fresh, so sweet. Elsa said, taking a deep breath. Zen smiled faintly. Isn't it the same? But Elsa shook her head. No, it's different. The light of adjudication not only purified all living creatures, but also all the dirt in the world. Zen also sniffed like she had done, but he didn't find anything different. But Elsa's words got Zen thinking. Why had the Chaos Ancient God built this prison? Why had he placed Timotheus, Ramsey, and all the other warriors here? Timotheus had once told Zen that the skeletons in this world were copies of everyone alive. But no matter how much he speculated, Zen couldn't seem to understand why the Chaos Ancient God had built this prison. Other members of the race walked out of the Bone Tower. A vast majority of the race members were well aware of the situation they were in. They could only follow the exiles of their own race. Only a small number of them refused to leave because they believed that the Sky Spirit Bone Tower was their home and they refused to follow the exiles out. When all the members of the race had made and shared their choices, a number of huge bone ships rose slowly into the air. Adele, Giacomo, and other elders directed the members towards the north in an orderly manner. This world was very small for the exiles, but it was still too large for the wild gods. This meant that it would take a long time for such a large number of people to migrate. Timotheus and Emily had agreed to assemble under the Starry Spirit Bone Tower in the north. Simultaneously, the members of the Snake Goddess race also started to move towards the Starry Spirit Bone Tower. The Starry Spirit Bone Tower was located in the territory of the Stardeer race. Although Levi of the Stardeer race had tried to kill Luther and had in turn been killed by Emily, the other exiles of this race didn't involve themselves. They were still willing to follow up with the Snake Goddess race. The exiles of the Southern Dipper race, Fire Melting race, and the other races also began to move towards the Starry Spirit Bone Tower. About 3 months later, more than 10 races and hundreds of thousands of people had finally gathered under the Starry Spirit Bone Tower. Zen, Zelda called out, her beautiful eyes narrowed as she spotted Zen in the crowd. Zelda had entered the snake goddess race and absorbed the wild god power of massive wild bones, and in the process, had improved a lot in cultivation. She was now a mid-rank wild god. She was dressed in a long yellow dress, making her features stand out even more. Her temperament had undergone a great change. Luther, who was beside her, also looked completely different. Zen didn't know what kind of a method Emily had used to improve Luther's cultivation and make him a top-ranked true god in such a short period of time. Even Zen marveled at the speed at which Luther had improved. But this didn't mean Luther was more talented than Zen. It only meant that Emily was able enough that she could efficiently train Luther. After a short reunion, they began to move again. No one knew where the Warden race was located, apart from Luther and Zelda, who led the way. Hundreds of thousands of people were still moving north. A few months later, they arrived at the northernmost part in the world. The land was deserted, devoid of any living creatures. Since there was no immemorial wilderness here, there was no white in this place. In fact, before this, many exiles had already explored this place, but to no avail. So when Zelda and Luther led them here, the exiles were confused. It was hard for them to imagine that the lair of the Warden race was hidden here. They continued to move, and half a month later, they came upon a serrated area. A dark void lay beyond it, the end of the world. Chapter 2220, The Erasing Water. No one had ever charted out the entirety of this world's expanse. The prison in which they were incarcerated only took up a very small area at the bottom of the chaos. The exiles only needed to pass through the serrated area and they would be able to leave this world. A number of exiles had already tried this, including Emily and Timotheus. Considering their strength, it would have been an easy task for them to make it through the serrated area, as the prison didn't actually use real walls to keep them inside. What really stopped one from leaving was the curse chain. So far, no one had been able to break free from the curse chain yet. The chain would have pulled them back immediately even if they thought they had been successful in escaping from this world. The exiles knew that Luther was the only one that had the ability to destroy the curse chain. They looked to him for guidance in getting out of this world. As she gazed upon the serrated area, Emily asked curiously, "Is the Warden race's lair not located in this world?" Luther only looked ahead and nodded in response. He drew a circle in the air as he extended his hand. Suddenly, they saw a unique scene appear inside the circle. The curse chains binding hundreds of thousands of people were entangled with each other in a great mass that extended beyond the serrated area into the darkness. The chains made a tortuous path that twisted and turned. "Can we find the lair of the Warden race along that path?" When Emily saw the path clearly, she raised her eyebrows slightly. The other exiles expectantly directed their gazes towards Luther. In turn, Luther looked towards Zelda. Actually, he still hadn't reached a deeper understanding of his own race's secrets. His sister was the one he depended on for this type of matter. Zelda nodded in acknowledgement and confirmed, "Yes, we can find them by following this path, but I think they've been well prepared." "We've been well prepared, too," Emily sneered. Almost all of the exiles had cold smiles on their faces, and several of them even clenched their fists in their intense desire to finally get their revenge on the Warden race. After being imprisoned for eons by the Warden race, it was understandable why the exiles all bore a grudge against the said race. Now that they finally had an opportunity to make the Warden race pay, they could barely hold back their glee. "Then, please follow us," Zelda said with a smile. At the head of the group were Luther and Zelda. Emily, Timotheus, Zen, and the other exiles followed closely behind. The hundreds of thousands of wild gods had no other choice but to stay outside. Just like in other cases where the situations were less than favorable for them, the wild gods chose to wait outside to see what would happen. As they traveled along the path, Zen noticed that the ambient light around them was growing dimmer and dimmer. Gradually, all of them were enveloped by a dark gray light. After about 2 hours, the group had already traveled more than 100 miles when they caught sight of the vast sprawling horizon in front of them. "Is this our destination?" Zen's eyes slightly widened and his eyebrows raised. The other exiles' eyes also flashed with excitement and anticipation. Previously, they could only see the existence of the cursed chains through Luther's ability. But after they went through the path together, it seemed that all of them gained the ability to see the cursed chains by themselves and they no longer needed Luther's assistance. All the creatures in this world were connected to the cursed chains that were floating in the air in front of them, probably reaching tens of millions or even hundreds of millions. The number of cursed chains was so great that they seemed to cover the sky and sun, extending as far as their eyes could see. Large platforms were located some distance away, and all the cursed chains were attached to them. "We've finally found this place, haha. One of the exiles, someone from the fire-melting race, was apparently unable to contain his excitement. All I need to do is break the curse chain on my body, right? Right after speaking, he stepped up into the air and summoned a spiral of flame that swirled around his whole body. It seemed that he used the spatial transference for this ability. Please don't. When she saw what he was about to do, Zelda attempted to halt the man by shouting out loud. But it was too late. In an instant, a mass of black liquid came out from the same space channel that the exile had created earlier. The black liquid engulfed him as soon as it came in contact with him. No one present knew the nature of this black liquid. All they saw was that it had wrapped the man tightly as it engulfed him completely. Quentin. The other exiles from the fire-melting race were shocked at the scene that unfolded in front of them. A short old man came forward and waved his hand. A white jade ruler appeared in his hand. He immediately pointed the jade ruler towards Quentin Chin, and a tremendous burst of energy was released from the jade ruler. The old man obviously wanted to help liberate Quentin Chin from the clutches of the black liquid. But the black liquid was not budged by the white jade ruler. In retaliation, it spread quickly over the white jade ruler, intending to devour the ruler together with the old man who wielded it. The old man was left with no choice but to accept that he couldn't save Quentin Chin. He gritted his teeth hard and let go of the white jade ruler. In the blink of an eye, Quentin Chin and the white jade ruler had been completely engulfed by the black liquid. Just like that, they had disappeared without a trace in front of everyone. The exiles had just witnessed one of them be obliterated in front of their very eyes. Being a member of the fire-melting race, he had been considered at the middle rank among the exiles. They hadn't expected that he wouldn't be able to put up even a bit of resistance against the black liquid. No one was able to speak for a time. They could do nothing but stare at the spot where Quentin Chin had been just a few moments ago. They already knew we would come, and they must have set several traps waiting for us. We can't act rashly, Zelda told the exiles, a worried frown on her face. A sliver of fear could be detected behind Emily's eyes as she stated, if my eyes didn't deceive me, this black liquid is the erasing water. They actually filled the space with the erasing water. How wicked they are. Timotheus agreed. It is indeed the erasing water. It can only exist in the space channel. We have no cause to panic as long as we are careful not to tear space apart. Everything will be fine. Even after Timotheus reassured them, everyone's spirits were still down. It had not been an easy task for the exiles to reach this place. The two sides hadn't had a direct confrontation yet, but one of them had already died out of the blue. This trip would most probably be more challenging than what they had expected. Since the start of their journey, Zen kept his silence as he followed the group quietly. Although he had already made great progress, he knew he still wasn't powerful enough as compared to these exiles. At the moment, he knew he wouldn't be able to be of much help yet, so he could only wait and see. Master Timotheus is right, Zelda nodded in affirmation. Everyone, follow me. Even though they have set many traps, they are not as powerful as you think. Just be careful and don't be so reckless. With Zelda in the lead, the group of 100 people made their way forward in the dark world. Right at that moment, there was a group of more than 30 people standing on an elevated platform deep in the world's recesses. They were not members of the Warden race, but another group of exiles from the Bone Towers. They were apparently led by no other than Spark of the Yellow Emperor race. Hey, this proves that this place is indeed powerful. Quentin hadn't been able to resist it and it became the end for him. In the past, I was his defeated opponent. One of the exiles said with a laugh. With a grim expression on his face, Spark shook his head and said, "Don't be too careless. I'm afraid it's not as easy as you think.